My son called me at 1 in the morning screaming that his wife was dying and he needed $20,000 to save her life. I told him to call his millionaire father-in-law and I went back to sleep. The next morning the police showed up at my door, but they were not there to tell me my daughter-in-law was dead. They were there to tell me where my son really was last night. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that sometimes the hardest thing a father can do is say no. The phone rang at exactly 1:14 in the morning. I let it ring 3 times before I reached over to the nightstand. At 75 years old, you do not get up fast anymore. 35 years of walking the frozen streets of Boston as a mail carrier for the United States Postal Service ruins your knees and leaves a permanent ache in your lower back. But my mind was sharp. Dad, you have to help me. Andre was not just talking, he was hyperventilating. His voice cracked, echoing in the quiet of my dark bedroom. It is Chloe. She collapsed. We are at the Memorial Private Hospital. They say it is a brain aneurysm, Dad. They say she needs emergency surgery right now, but they will not take our insurance. They need a $20,000 deposit to wheel her into the operating room. Dad, she is going to die if you do not wire the money. I sat up slowly and leaned against the headboard. I did not panic. I did not jump out of bed to grab my checkbook. Over the last few years, I had learned to filter every word my son said. I listened to the background noise through the receiver. I expected to hear the chaotic hum of an emergency room, the intercom announcements, the rushing footsteps of nurses. I heard nothing, just a hollow quiet and the ragged breathing of my son. Take a breath, Andre, I said, my voice low and steady. You are telling me a hospital in this country is refusing life-saving emergency surgery for a ruptured brain aneurysm because you do not have cash up front. That is not how the law works. That is not how emergency rooms work. You do not understand, Dad, he screamed, the desperation sounding incredibly real. This is a private facility. Her specialist is here. They are making us sign waivers. I do not have time to argue with you about hospital policies. I need 20 grand. Please, I know you have that emergency fund Mom left behind. Do not let my wife die. He brought up Ruby. He actually brought up his mother to squeeze money out of me. Ruby worked as a cafeteria cook for 40 years. We saved pennies to pay off this house. We saved dimes to put him through college. And when she passed away 5 years ago, she left a modest life insurance policy. A policy Andre and his wife Chloe had been eyeing ever since the funeral. I rubbed the bridge of my nose, feeling the familiar sting of disappointment. Andre, why are you calling me? Why are you calling a retired mailman who lives on a fixed pension when your father-in-law is Richard Sterling? The silence on the other end of the line was immediate and heavy. It only lasted a second, but it told me everything I needed to know. The panic in his voice shifted into something defensive. Richard is a real estate tycoon, Andre. I continued, not raising my voice, but making sure every word cut deep. He lives in a gated mansion in the suburbs. He owns half the commercial properties in the district. When you two got married, Richard made sure to loudly mock my rented suite in front of 200 guests. He told everyone how he had to pay for the open bar because your side of the family was practically on food stamps. He looked at me like I was dirt on his shoes. Dad, this is not the time for your pride, Andre pleaded, his voice dropping to a frantic whisper. It is not pride, it is math, I replied. Just last week, Chloe posted pictures of the brand new Porsche he bought her for her birthday. A car that costs more than my entire retirement fund. She made sure to tag you in it, sitting in the driveway of the house Richard bought for you two. So I ask you again, why are you asking me for $20,000? Dad, Richard is out of the country, Andre stammered, the excuse sounding rehearsed. He is on a yacht in the Mediterranean. I cannot reach him. The satellite phone goes straight to voicemail. You are the only one I can reach. I need the money now. If Chloe is dying on an operating table, you call the embassy. You call his lawyers. You call his financial advisors who manage her trust fund, I said. You do not call me at 1 in the morning asking for the exact amount of money you know I have left in my savings. The exact amount Chloe joked about when she found out how much Mom left me. Dad, I am begging you. Do you want her blood on your hands? If you do not do this, I will never forgive you. You will never see us again. I felt a coldness wash over me. It was not the cold of the Boston night. It was the realization of what my son had become. He was standing by while his wife and her family treated me like garbage for years. Chloe refused to eat the food at my house because she said my neighborhood was not safe for her expensive purse. They excluded me from holidays because Richard threw more lavish parties where I did not fit the aesthetic. I was good enough to babysit their dog when they went to Europe, but I was not good enough to sit at their Thanksgiving table. And now when they supposedly needed a miracle, they expected me to empty my bank account. I am sorry Chloe is sick, Andre, I said, holding on to every ounce of my dignity, but I do not have $20,000 to give you. Call Richard. Call a hospital that follows federal laws. Call an ambulance to transfer her to a public hospital, but do not call me to fix a lie I cannot see through. Good night. Dad, wait, do not you dare hang up on me. I swear to God, if you... I pressed the red button on the screen. I did not just hang up. I powered the phone completely off. I watched the screen go black and then I placed it face down on the nightstand. I lay back down and pulled the blanket over my chest. I stared at the dark ceiling for a long time. My heart was beating faster than usual, but my conscience was clear. If it was a real medical emergency, the hospital would treat her. They had to. But my gut, built on 75 years of surviving in a world that never gave a black man a free pass, told me something else was happening. I had seen too many scams, too many hustles to be blinded by tears over the phone. Something ugly was unfolding in the dark, and they wanted me to foot the bill. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath of the quiet air in my home. The house was paid off. The doors were locked. I had survived a lot worse than a guilt trip from a boy who had lost his way. I eventually drifted back to sleep, trusting the instincts that had kept me alive this long. Little did I know, the nightmare was not happening in a hospital operating room. The medical emergency was a complete fabrication. The real crisis was much darker, and it was going to arrive on my front porch the very next morning wearing a police uniform. I woke up at 6 in the morning just like I had for the last 40 years. The sun was barely breaking over the Boston skyline, casting long gray shadows across my living room. I walked into the kitchen and turned on the coffee maker. I did not turn on the television. I did not turn on the radio. I just stood there listening to the water drip through the filter. I looked at the phone sitting on the kitchen counter. I had plugged it in when I finally went back to sleep. The screen was completely blank. There were no missed calls. There were no frantic text messages. There were no voicemails from my son telling me that his wife had passed away in the night. If a woman was truly dying of a brain aneurysm, there would be updates. There would be relatives calling. There would be chaos. But my house was perfectly silent. That silence confirmed what my gut had told me at 1 in the morning. The medical emergency was a ghost story. My son had lied to my face, or rather he had lied to my ear. But knowing you are right does not stop the heavy knot from forming in your stomach. My son was in trouble. Real trouble. Not the kind of trouble $20,000 could fix. I poured my coffee into a ceramic mug. It was the mug my late wife Ruby had bought for me when I retired from the Postal Service. I held it with both hands, letting the heat seep into my arthritis. I sat at the small kitchen table and watched the clock on the wall. The second hand swept around the dial in a slow, steady rhythm. Tick, tick, tick. I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. I just did not know how heavy that shoe was going to be. At exactly 8:15, the silence was shattered. It was not the high-pitched ring of the telephone. It was a knock at the front door. It was not the polite tap of a neighbor asking to borrow a snow shovel. It was 3 heavy, deliberate strikes against the solid wood, the kind of knock that rattles the hinges, the kind of knock that commands you to open up immediately. I set my coffee mug down. I tightened the belt of my robe and walked slowly down the narrow hallway. My knees popped with every step, a reminder of the thousands of miles I had walked delivering mail in the snow and rain. When I reached the front door, I leaned forward and looked through the small brass peephole. 2 uniformed police officers were standing on my porch. One was a tall white man with a graying mustache resting his hand casually near his radio. The other was a younger black man holding a small black notepad. My heart skipped a beat. It is a harsh reality, but for an older black man in America, seeing 2 police officers on your porch first thing in the morning never brings a sense of comfort. It brings a cold spike of adrenaline. You immediately run through a mental checklist of every person you love. I thought about the phone call again. Did Andre do something stupid after I hung up? Did he try to rob a convenience store to get the $20,000? Did he get hurt? Was he in the morgue? I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. The morning air was biting cold, but I hardly felt it. Alonzo Wright, the older officer, asked, looking down at a printed piece of paper in his hand. "That is me," I answered, keeping my voice calm and my hands clearly visible resting on the edge of the door. "How can I help you, officers?" "I am Officer Miller, and this is Officer Davis. We are looking for the next of kin for an Andre Wright. Are you his father?" The words next of kin hit me like a physical blow to the chest. Next of kin is what they say when they are holding a plastic bag full of personal effects. Next of kin is what they say when someone is lying on a cold metal table. My grip on the edge of the door tightened until my knuckles turned white. My breathing stopped. Despite everything, despite the disrespect, the distance, and the lies, Andre was still my son. He was still the little boy I taught to ride a bicycle on these very sidewalks. "Yes, I am his father," I said, my voice dropping to a harsh, dry whisper. "What happened to my son? Is he all right? Is it his wife? Did she pass away at the hospital?" The two officers exchanged a quick, confused look. The younger one, Officer Davis, flipped a page on his notepad and frowned. "His wife, sir. We do not have any information regarding his wife. We are here about your son. He is alive and uninjured, but he is currently in custody at the 4th Precinct downtown. He listed this address as his permanent residence on his booking sheet. We came to verify the address and to inform you of his arrest." In custody, I repeated the words, feeling thick and foreign in my mouth. Arrested? For what? That does not make any sense. He called me at 1 a.m. He said he was at Memorial Private Hospital. He said his wife Chloe was having emergency brain surgery and they needed cash. Officer Miller shook his head slowly, a look of grim realization settling on his face. "Mr. Wright, I do not know anything about a hospital or a brain surgery, but I can tell you with absolute certainty that your son was not at Memorial Hospital last night." "Then where was he?" I demanded, the initial shock slowly morphing into a cold, hard anger. "At exactly 2 o'clock this morning, your son was apprehended by a private security patrol and turned over to the Boston Police Department," Officer Miller explained. "He was caught breaking into a commercial office building in the financial district. Specifically, he had bypassed a security gate and was attempting to pry open the door to a private corporate accounting firm." "An accounting firm?" I asked. The pieces of the puzzle were scattered all over the porch and none of them were fitting together. Why on earth would my son break into an accounting firm in the middle of the night? Officer Davis looked at his notes again. "The property is owned by Sterling Real Estate Holdings. The accounting firm handles all of their internal corporate accounts. Your son was caught with a duffel bag full of tools, a crowbar, and a hammer. He caused significant property damage to the reinforced doors before the silent alarms tripped. He is being charged with breaking and entering destruction of private property and attempted corporate burglary." Sterling Real Estate Holdings. The name echoed in my head like a gunshot. That was Richard Sterling. That was Chloe's father, my son's arrogant millionaire father-in-law, the man who owned yachts and bought Porsches, the man who looked at me like I was a peasant at his daughter's wedding. The lie Andre had spun just a few hours earlier completely unraveled right there in the freezing air. There was no aneurysm. There was no medical emergency. There was no greedy hospital administrator refusing insurance. Chloe was perfectly fine. At 1:14 in the morning, my son had called me screaming and crying, begging for $20,000 to save a life. When I refused to drain my retirement savings, he did not go back to a waiting room to pray. He drove downtown to the financial district, put on a mask, and took a crowbar to his father-in-law's corporate accounting office. He needed the money to cover up something massive, something hidden in those financial records. And when he could not get the cash from me to pay someone off, he desperately tried to destroy the physical evidence himself. "Mr. Wright," the younger officer asked, pulling me violently out of my thoughts, "do you understand the charges against your son? His arraignment will be later today, but he has allowed visitors starting at 9 in the morning. He used his one phone call to ask that you come down to the station. He said it is a matter of life and death." I looked at the officers. I felt a deep, exhausting rage settling into my bones, the kind of anger that burns cold and sharp. My son had tried to manipulate a grieving widower out of his life savings using the threat of his own wife's death. He had tried to exploit my empathy to fund his criminal cover-up. "I understand, officers," I said, my voice flat and completely devoid of any emotion. "I appreciate you coming to tell me. I will be down at the precinct shortly." The officers nodded, tipped their hats respectfully, and walked back down the steps to their cruiser. I watched them drive away before I slowly closed the heavy front door and locked the deadbolt. I did not rush. I walked into my bedroom and opened the closet. I pulled out my thick winter coat. I grabbed my keys and my wallet. I was going to the police station. But I was not going down there to rescue my son. I was not going to pay his bail. I was going to look him right in the eye in his holding cell and find out exactly what kind of poison had infected his life. The game was over and it was time for the truth. I drove to the 4th Precinct in the dead silence of the early morning. I did not turn on the radio. I just listened to the tires rolling over the freezing Boston asphalt. My mind was spinning with pieces of a puzzle that did not fit together. The son I raised, the boy who used to cry when he accidentally stepped on a caterpillar, was now sitting in a holding cell for breaking and entering. And worse, he had used a sick lie about his wife dying to try and drain my life savings. When I walked through the heavy glass doors of the police station, the smell of bleach and stale sweat hit me. It is the smell of desperation and mistakes that cannot be undone. I walked up to the front desk and gave my son's name to the duty officer. He did not even look up at me. He just typed on his keyboard, nodded, and pointed down a long hallway behind a heavy iron door. Another officer led me down a corridor with peeling gray paint. The sound of keys clinking echoed loudly. When the holding cell door opened, I saw him. My only son. Andre was sitting slumped on a long wooden bench with his hands cuffed in front of him. The designer shirt he loved to show off to me was torn and stained with dark streaks of dirt. His clothes were a mess. One of his eyes was swollen shut and purple, and there was dried blood near his mouth. The perfect illusion of a successful man had been stripped away completely. All that was left was a pathetic trembling shell under the flickering fluorescent lights. He looked up when he heard my footsteps. When our eyes met, he could not speak. He just dropped his head down to his cuffed hands and started crying. Not the fake, hysterical sobbing from the phone call last night, but the heavy, choking gasps of a man who has lost everything. "Dad," he whispered, his voice rough and shaking. "I am sorry. I am so sorry, Dad." I did not rush over to hug him. I did not comfort him. I pulled out the only metal chair in the room and sat down right across from him. The distance between us was less than 3 feet, but it felt like we were standing on opposite sides of a massive canyon. "You are not in a hospital," I said, my voice flat and cold as ice. "Your wife is not on an operating table. There is no brain surgery. The police told me you were arrested using a crowbar to pry open the doors at Richard's accounting office. I want the truth, Andre, not one more lie. Why did you do something so stupid?" Andre took a deep breath, his chest heaving. He could not look me in the eye. He just stared at the scratches on the metal table. "It was for Chloe," he started, his voice thin and full of fear. "You do not understand, Dad. She is in terrible trouble. Trouble that no one could fix except me." I crossed my arms, trying to push down the anger boiling in my veins. "Your wife is always in trouble," I shot back. "She spends too much. She wastes money. But that does not explain why you are smashing up your own father-in-law's office at 2 a.m. "Listen to me, Dad," Andre interrupted, sounding desperate. "Chloe did not just overspend, she did something much worse. She is the financial director for the investment branch of Richard's company. 6 months ago, she secretly transferred $200,000 from the corporate investment fund into a private account. She thought she could use that money to invest in cryptocurrency. She believed all those online promises about massive returns. She planned to make a huge profit and quietly return the original money before the annual audit. No one was supposed to find out." I felt my stomach tighten. $200,000. A staggering amount of money that I never even dared to dream about during my 35 years of hard labor. But the market crashed. Andre continued, his voice cracking. "All of it, $200,000, vanished into thin air. There is not a single penny left, Dad." She panicked. She hid this from me until last night. Why last night, I asked, narrowing my eyes. "Because this morning at 9 o'clock, Richard's company is having a full comprehensive audit." Andre explained, tears streaming down his bruised face. "The independent auditors are coming to check the books. They will spot that $200,000 hole immediately. Every digital footprint leads straight back to Chloe's computer and her accounts. Her father, Richard, is a ruthless man. He does not care that she is his daughter. If he finds out the truth, he will throw her in federal prison and destroy her life to protect his company." I sat perfectly still, letting every word sink into my brain. The disgusting truth was finally coming to light. The daughter-in-law who always looked down on my poverty, who mocked my small house, was nothing more than a common thief. She stole from her own family out of pure, bottomless greed. "So, what was the $20,000 you begged me for last night?" I asked, my tone turning sharp. "Were you planning to use my retirement savings to cover a $200,000 hole? Do you think math works that way?" "No, Dad." Andre shook his head frantically. "That 20 grand was for a bribe. Chloe managed to contact the lead auditor last night. The guy is greedy. He agreed to look the other way and wipe the transaction records from the final report if we handed him $20,000 in cash right then and there. It was our only way out. But we could not borrow from anyone else. Our credit cards are maxed out. The bank said no. My only option was you. And when I said no, I replied, tasting the bitterness in my mouth. When I refused to hand over that money, you decided to solve the problem by putting on black clothes, grabbing a crowbar, and breaking into the building. I had no other choice, Andre sobbed, burying his face in his hands. I was going to break into the server room. I was going to smash the hard drives that hold the accounting data before the auditors arrived. Without the data, they cannot prove Chloe embezzled the money. I just wanted to protect my wife, Dad. I just wanted to save my family. Save your family, I repeated, every word dripping with disgust. You call that saving your family? You call me in the middle of the night inventing a story about your wife dying from a ruptured brain aneurysm to bleed me dry of the money your mother left behind. You lied to your old father to cover up the crimes of a woman who treats our family like dirt. You turned yourself into a violent criminal to protect a thief. That is not saving your family, Andre. That is destroying it. You have to help me. Andre looked up, his eyes pleading. You have to get me out of here. If Richard finds out about the break-in, he will kill me. He will pin the missing money on me too. You have to hire a lawyer for me. Please use that $20,000 to post my bail. Please, Dad. I looked straight into my son's swollen eyes. I felt a wave of sorrow, but there was absolutely no pity left in my heart. He chose to stand with the people who constantly trampled on my dignity. He chose deception, and now he expected me to clean up the wreckage caused by their own greed. You made your choice last night, Andre, I said slowly, standing up from the metal chair. When you decided to take that crowbar and smash the glass doors of your father-in-law's company, you picked a path I cannot follow. I do not have $20,000 to pay for your wife's crimes, and I do not have money to bail out a man who used his dead mother to con me. Are you going to leave me in here? Andre screamed, his voice breaking with panic. You are my father. You cannot do this to me. You gave up the right to call yourself my son the second you used your mother's memory to steal from me, I answered coldly. Call your beloved wife. Call your millionaire father-in-law. Let us see if the people you worship so much will come down here and pull you out of this mess. I turned around and walked toward the door without looking back. Andre's cries echoed down the hallway, bouncing off the cold stone walls. But my feet kept moving steady and firm. I thought this was the ultimate humiliation. I thought the truth about the $200,000 was their darkest secret. But I had no idea this was only the tip of a very toxic iceberg. A much more ruthless and evil plot was waiting for me. A trap had already been set, and they thought I was just a tired old fish ready to be caught. But they were wrong. My patience ended in that holding cell. It was time for me to teach them the true cost of betrayal. I was halfway down the corridor walking away from the holding cell when the heavy metal doors at the front of the precinct swung violently open. The sharp clicking of expensive leather shoes echoed against the cold concrete floor. It was not a police officer walking in. It was Richard Sterling. He walked into the police station like he owned the entire city block, wearing a custom-tailored Italian suit that easily cost more than my first car. Right behind him was his daughter Chloe, clinging tightly to the arm of a man who looked exactly like a high-priced corporate shark of a lawyer. Chloe was wearing a massive pair of dark designer sunglasses to hide her eyes, but her theatrical performance started the exact second she stepped into the room. She let out a loud, dramatic sob. She did not run to the holding cell to check on her husband, who was sitting there with a bruised face and a broken spirit. Instead, she buried her face into her father's expensive shoulder. "Oh, Daddy!" she cried, her voice echoing shrilly through the sterile hallway. "He made me do it. Andre made me do it. I was so scared, Daddy. He is out of his mind." I stood perfectly still near the wall, watching this masterclass in manipulation unfold right in front of my eyes. In the holding cell behind me, Andre pressed his face against the iron bars. His eyes were wide with sheer disbelief and absolute betrayal. "Chloe, what are you talking about?" he pleaded, his voice cracking. "We were in this together. You took the money. You told me to destroy the servers." The lawyer stepped forward holding a sleek black leather briefcase. He did not even bother to look at Andre. He spoke directly to the precinct captain who had just walked out of his office. "My client, Miss Sterling, is a victim of severe emotional manipulation and financial abuse," the lawyer announced smoothly. "We have reason to believe her husband, Andre Wright, coerced her into transferring corporate funds into a volatile digital asset account against her will. He then attempted to destroy the corporate accounting servers to cover his tracks. She is fully prepared to cooperate with the authorities." Andre gasped loudly. The remaining color completely drained from his bruised face. He realized in real time that the woman he just tried to go to prison for, the woman he lied to his own father to protect, was actively throwing him under the bus to save her own skin. I watched my son grip the metal bars until his knuckles turned completely white. He looked at his wife, begging her with his eyes to tell the truth. But Chloe did not even look in his direction. She just kept crying fake tears into Richard's $1,000 suit. Richard patted his daughter's blonde hair and then slowly turned his head. His cold blue eyes locked onto me, standing quietly in the shadows. A nasty, arrogant smirk crawled across his face. He gently pushed Chloe toward the lawyer and walked slowly toward me, closing the distance until I could smell the overpowering scent of his expensive cologne. "Well, well, well," Richard said, his voice dripping with absolute poison. "Look what crawled out of the South Side projects. Alonzo Wright in the flesh. I guess the apple does not fall far from the rotten tree, does it?" I did not flinch. I stood tall, pulling my shoulders back and looking the millionaire straight in his eyes. I remember the very first day Andre brought Chloe to our house for a family dinner. Richard had driven her there in his luxury sport utility vehicle and absolutely refused to step foot on my front porch. He sat in his running car and told his daughter loudly that my neighborhood smelled like poverty and failure. Now he was standing in a police station treating me like a hardened criminal just by association. "This is what happens when people like you try to take shortcuts." Richard sneered, his voice loud enough for every police officer in the room to hear. "You spend 35 years carrying mail in the snow like a pack mule, and you breed a son who thinks he can just steal from his betters. It is in your blood, Alonzo. You people are always looking for a handout. Always looking for a sneaky way to cheat the system instead of working for it." Richard reached into the inside pocket of his suit coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He threw it intentionally, letting it flutter down to the dirty floor right at my shoes. It was a bail receipt. "I just paid the $10,000 cash bond for your pathetic excuse of a son," Richard whispered, leaning in so close I could feel his breath. "Do you know why I did that, Alonzo? Because I do not want him sitting safely in a local jail cell playing the victim. I want him out walking the streets absolutely terrified. My legal team is drafting a federal indictment as we speak. We are going to prove that your boy was the criminal mastermind behind the missing $200,000. We are going to prove he intimidated my poor vulnerable daughter into committing wire fraud." "But he did not do it," I said, my voice calm and completely level despite the rage boiling in my stomach. "Your daughter transferred that money. You and I both know that, Richard. You are just looking for a convenient scapegoat to protect your company's stock price and keep your precious daughter out of handcuffs." Richard laughed, a cold, hard sound that had absolutely no joy in it. "It does not matter what I know, you broke old man," Richard sneered, leaning back. "It only matters what I can prove in a court of law, and I can buy the absolute best truth that money has to offer. Who do you honestly think a federal judge is going to believe? A highly respected real estate developer and his traumatized, crying daughter, or the desperate broke son of a retired black mailman who was caught red-handed with a crowbar trying to smash my corporate office doors? He is going to federal prison, Alonzo. They will lock him up for 20 solid years. Unless, of course, you can find a way to make me whole." "Make you whole," I repeated, staring at the veins popping out on his neck. "What exactly does that mean?" Richard adjusted his expensive silk tie, smoothing it down over his chest. "It means $200,000, Alonzo. Cash. Reimbursed directly to my corporate accounts by the end of this week. If you can magically produce that money, I might convince my board of directors not to press federal charges against your boy. We will just let him take the fall for the simple break-in, and he gets a slap on the wrist with probation. But if you cannot find that money, your son's life is entirely over. I will crush him like a bug." He knew exactly what he was doing. Richard knew my pension barely covered my groceries and utilities. He knew the only asset I had in the world was the house my late wife Ruby and I had spent 30 years paying off. He was not just trying to punish Andre, he was trying to bankrupt me. He wanted to strip away the only piece of wealth my family had ever built. It was a calculated, ruthless shakedown happening right in the middle of a police station. I looked at Richard, I looked at the piece of crumpled paper on the floor, and then I looked past him at Andre, who was being led out of the holding cell by an officer since his bail was officially posted. Andre looked like a completely broken dog. He had sacrificed his dignity, his freedom, and his relationship with his only father for a woman who was now serving him up to the wolves on a silver platter. I did not bend down to pick up the receipt. I did not yell or curse or throw a punch. I stepped right over the paper. I stepped right past Richard and his crying, lying daughter. "Where do you think you are going?" Richard called out behind me, his voice cracking with sudden anger. "You better start figuring out how to sell that dump you call a house, Alonzo. The clock is ticking." I walked out of the police station and into the freezing morning air. The icy wind whipped across my face, but I felt a massive fire burning deep in my chest. Richard thought he had me completely cornered. He thought his immense wealth and his team of slick lawyers made him invincible. But he had made one fatal miscalculation. He assumed I was just a tired old man who would roll over and beg for mercy. He assumed I had no power and no intelligence. I got into my old car and gripped the steering wheel tightly. My son had made his bed and now he was going to have to lie in it. But Richard Sterling had just declared war on a man who had absolutely nothing left to lose. I started the engine. I was entirely done playing defense. It was time to start digging into the Sterling family secrets. I was walking down the cold hallway of the police station when the sound of heavy footsteps running frantically across the tile floor echoed behind me. I did not even have time to push open the heavy glass doors before I heard a loud, desperate scream. It was Andre. The bail money Richard paid had just released him from the holding cell, but he did not look like a free man. He looked like a cornered animal that had completely lost its mind. He did not run toward his wife. He did not try to hug Chloe. Instead, he sprinted straight past me and threw himself onto the dirty floor right at Richard Sterling's feet. A 40-year-old man dropping to his knees and begging a millionaire who had just finished humiliating his entire family. "Please, Richard, please," Andre sobbed, reaching out to grab the hem of the older man's expensive suit pants. "Please do not destroy my life. You know I did this for Chloe. You know she took that money. Please do not make me take the fall for her mistakes. I will work for you for free for the rest of my life. I will do whatever you want." Richard looked down at my son with a level of absolute disgust that made my stomach turn. He violently yanked his pant leg out of Andre's grip like he was shaking off a diseased rat. Richard did not even dignify my son with a single word. He just adjusted his jacket, nodded smoothly to his expensive lawyer, and placed a protective hand on Chloe's shoulder. He guided his daughter through the double doors and out into the morning light. Chloe never even turned her head to look at the man who had just tried to sacrifice his own freedom for her. They climbed into a sleek black town car waiting at the curb and drove away, leaving Andre kneeling in the dirt. I stood there and watched the absolute cowardice of my own flesh and blood unfold. I did not feel any pity for him. I only felt a deep, heavy wave of shame. I turned my back on the pathetic scene and continued walking out the doors. "Dad!" Andre screamed, scrambling to his feet and chasing after me into the freezing parking lot. He ran ahead and blocked my path, throwing his hands down hard on the hood of my old sedan. "You cannot just walk away. You heard what Richard said in there. He is going to send me to federal prison. 20 years, Dad. I will die in a place like that." I looked at him through the morning frost gathering on my windshield. I slowly opened the car door and stepped out, standing tall despite the ache in my bones. I heard exactly what he said. "Andre," I replied, my voice completely hollow and devoid of any warmth. "And I also just watched you get on your hands and knees to beg the very man who wants to lock you in a cage. I watched your wife, the woman you were willing to destroy your own future to protect, walk right past you like you did not even exist." "You have to save me," Andre yelled, his face red and covered in tears and dried blood. "You are my only hope right now. You need to sell the house." The words hung in the freezing air. For a second, I honestly thought I had misheard him. "Sell the house?" I repeated slowly. "Yes," Andre said, his eyes wide and completely unhinged. "The neighborhood is gentrifying. Developers are buying up lots on your street all the time. That house is worth at least $300,000 right now. You can sell it and give the $200,000 to Richard to cover Chloe's mess. That will get him to drop the charges. I will be free. You can just take whatever is left and move into a smaller apartment somewhere else. You live by yourself anyway, Dad. You do not need a big house like that." The absolute audacity of his words slid out of his mouth so easily it was terrifying. He was demanding that his 75-year-old father throw away the only home he had. The home where his mother and I had scraped together every spare dime for 30 years to pay off. "You want me to move into a small apartment," I said, letting the pure venom seep into my voice. "You are standing here demanding that I throw away the roof over my head and erase every memory of your mother just to pay off the debts of a thief. Where do you get this kind of nerve, Andre?" "If you do not do this, my life is over," he roared, slamming his fist on the car hood again. "Would you seriously rather keep a pile of old bricks than save your own son's life? If you do not give Richard that money, I am going to jail for a decade, maybe more. You will never see me again. You are going to die completely alone. I stared at his twisted, selfish face. There was absolutely zero remorse in his eyes. He was not sorry for breaking the law. He was not sorry for lying to me about Chloe having a brain aneurysm. He was only sorry that he got caught, and now he was trying to use his own freedom to blackmail me. If you go to federal prison for 10 years, I told him, speaking very slowly and clearly, then that is the price you pay for your own stupidity. I would rather live entirely alone in the house I built with Ruby than sleep on the street because I enabled a coward. I am not selling my home. I am not giving Richard Sterling a single penny. You created this garbage fire, Andre. Now you figure out how to put it out yourself. I got back into my car, slammed the heavy door shut, and turned the key in the ignition. Andre hit his hands against the passenger window, screaming terrible curses at me. He called me a selfish old fool. He cursed my name. I ignored him. I shifted the car into drive and pulled out of the parking lot, leaving my son throwing a massive tantrum in the cold concrete lot of the police precinct. The drive back to my neighborhood felt longer than usual. My fingers gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. I knew I did the right thing. Selling the house would not have saved Andre anyway. It would only have turned me into another pawn on Richard Sterling's chessboard. I was never going to let them strip away my final shred of dignity. I turned onto my familiar street where the old oak trees stood bare against the gray winter sky. My small red brick two-story house sat quietly at the end of the block. It was not a luxury mansion. The paint on the window shutters was starting to peel and the driveway needed patching, but it was my fortress. It was the place where Ruby and I painted the kitchen cabinets together and where we danced in the living room on our anniversaries. We paid off the final mortgage payment 15 years ago. I still remember the exact day I placed the clear property deed on Ruby's bedside table. That piece of paper meant we were finally free. I parked my car in the gravel driveway and stepped out, feeling the massive exhaustion of the morning finally catching up to my body. I just wanted to go inside, make a hot cup of black tea, and close my eyes for an hour. But as I walked up the 3 wooden steps to my front porch, my boots suddenly stopped moving. There was a bright neon red piece of paper taped diagonally across the center of my front door. The loud red color clashed aggressively against the dark oak wood. Amidst the usual junk mail flyers and electric bills shoved into the mail slot, this paper looked entirely different. It was a thick legal document plastered directly to the wood, like a threat that could not be ignored. My heart skipped a beat. I stepped closer, pulling my reading glasses from my coat pocket. The bold black capital letters printed across the top of the red paper hit my eyes like a physical punch. Notice of default and foreclosure sale. I blinked rapidly, trying to clear my vision, hoping I was just hallucinating from the lack of sleep. But the harsh black ink remained perfectly sharp. Below the massive headline were the specific details. Property owner Alonzo Wright, account status 6 months past due. The document stated that the property would be seized by the lending institution and auctioned off to the highest bidder if the outstanding balance was not paid immediately. I stood completely frozen on my own front porch, my hands trembling as I reached out to touch the red paper. This was absolutely impossible. It had to be a mistake. I did not owe any bank a single dime. I tore up my mortgage book 15 years ago. I paid my property taxes and my home insurance on time every single year. I had never taken out a second mortgage or used my home as collateral for anything in my entire life. A sudden freezing chill ran down my spine, spreading through my chest. I remembered the nasty, arrogant smirk on Richard Sterling's face back at the police station. I remembered his cruel words telling me that the clock was ticking and I better figure out how to sell my house fast. How did he know I was about to lose my home? Why would a massive real estate billionaire care about one old brick house in a working-class neighborhood? And then another dark, terrifying puzzle piece clicked into place inside my head. Last night at 1 a.m, Andre had called me screaming and crying, begging for exactly $20,000. He told me it was to pay for an emergency brain surgery. Then this morning he changed his story and said the $20,000 was a cash bribe for a corporate auditor. But what if that was also a complete lie? What if that $20,000 was not for an auditor at all? What if $20,000 was the exact amount of money needed to pay the past due penalty fees to the bank to stop them from foreclosing on this house today? I ripped the red paper off the door, crushing it in my fist. A sickening conspiracy was wrapping its dark tentacles all around me. Someone had used my name. Someone had stolen my identity and placed the home I built with my dead wife on the chopping block. They had planned to strip me of everything I owned while keeping me completely in the dark. Andre's cowardice, Richard's supreme arrogance, and this bright red foreclosure notice were all connected like a tight rope slowly wrapping around my neck. But they made a massive mistake, assuming I would just collapse and cry. The exhaustion I felt earlier vanished, completely replaced by an inferno of pure, burning rage. I unlocked my front door, stepped inside, and walked straight to the telephone on the kitchen wall. I was not going to call my son. I was going to call the bank. It was time to rip the roof off this entire lie. The real war was just beginning. I gripped the red paper tightly in my hand. The wrinkled foreclosure notice was completely real, and the black letters were burned into my brain. I walked into the kitchen, pulled out an old wooden chair, and sat down. My hands were shaking as I reached for the landline telephone on the wall. The phone number for the bank was printed in bold at the bottom of the red paper. I dialed the numbers one by one. The loud beeps echoed in the empty house. My heart was pounding hard in my chest, but my mind was completely freezing over. The phone rang twice before an automated voice answered. "Welcome to the Central Bank Loan Default Department. Please hold for the next available representative." The hold music started playing. It was a soft, classical tune, but to me it sounded like a funeral march. Every single second felt like an eternity. I looked around my kitchen. I looked at the wooden cabinets I built with my own hands. I looked at the pale yellow walls my wife Ruby had picked out. This place was my entire life. No one had the right to take it away from me. "Hello, my name is Sarah from the Default Resolution Department. How can I help you today?" The young woman's voice suddenly broke the silence. I cleared my throat, trying to keep my breathing steady. "Hello, Sarah. My name is Alonzo Wright. I just got home and found a red paper taped to my front door. It says my house is about to be foreclosed on. There has to be a massive mistake here. I paid off my mortgage entirely 15 years ago. I do not owe your bank a single penny." I heard the loud clicking of a keyboard over the phone. Sarah went quiet for a few seconds. "Mr. Wright, could you please provide your social security number and the property address so I can verify the records?" I read the numbers to her slowly. I waited for her to apologize. I waited for her to tell me this was just a system error or some stupid printing mistake. But what Sarah said next felt like a bucket of ice water dumped straight over my head. "Mr. Wright, the records here are very clear. Your property is currently holding a mortgage for a $250,000 loan. This loan was dispersed exactly 6 months ago. Since then, there has not been a single payment made toward the principal or the interest. Because the account is 6 months past due, the automated system issued the foreclosure order this morning." I closed my eyes tightly. $250,000, 6 months ago. "That is completely impossible," I growled, trying to hold back my absolute fury. "I have never stepped foot inside your bank. I have never signed any loan documents. Someone stole my identity. Someone forged my signature. How do you just hand over $250,000 to a total stranger?" "Mr. Wright, please calm down," Sarah said, her voice turning defensive. "This was an online loan application. The documents were submitted through our secure electronic portal. All the verification details matched perfectly. The social security number, a copy of your driver's license, and your credit history. There was even a verified digital signature and a short video clip showing your face nodding in agreement to the loan terms. We transferred the $250,000 directly into a linked account under your name. A linked account under my name. A video of me nodding. Technology today can fake absolutely anything. Artificial intelligence can copy anyone's voice and face using just a few pictures from the internet. Chloe. My daughter-in-law was a financial director. She understood technology, she understood the banking system, and she absolutely hated my guts. I took a deep breath, feeling my throat go completely dry. "Sarah," I asked, my voice dropping down to a harsh whisper, "if I want to stop this foreclosure from happening today, what do I have to do? What is the exact amount of the late fees and accumulated interest as of this morning?" More keyboard clicking. "To cancel the foreclosure order, you need to immediately pay the full amount of the late penalties and the 6 months of accumulated interest, sir. The exact number as of 8 o'clock this morning is exactly $20,000. If we do not receive this payment before noon today, the file goes straight to the courthouse and the property will be officially seized. $20,000. The number echoed inside my brain. It pounded against my eardrums. It ripped my heart into pieces. $20,000. That was the exact amount of money Andre had been screaming and crying for at 1 o'clock in the morning. All the final puzzle pieces violently crashed together, creating the most cruel and disgusting picture a father could ever imagine. The truth was not that Chloe had a brain aneurysm. The truth was not that Chloe needed money to bribe a corporate auditor. Both of those stories were blatant lies. They were cheap theatrical scripts written to bleed me dry. The real truth was that they had stolen my identity 6 months ago. They had mortgaged my house to get $250,000 in cash. They threw that money away on stupid investments or selfish spending, and they lost every single penny of it. They let the massive debt grow in the dark. And then last night, when the bank sent the final warning that the house would be seized this morning if $20,000 in penalties was not paid, they panicked. But even in their absolute panic, they still did not have the guts to tell me the truth. Andre, my own flesh and blood, called me and invented a fake story about his wife dying just so I would willingly hand over my life savings to pay off their bank penalty. He wanted me to pay the debt to cover up their crime. He planned to let me keep living in the dark, completely unaware that my house was carrying a $250,000 mortgage. And when I refused to give him the money because I saw right through his lies, Andre had no other options left. He could not get the money from Richard because if Richard found out his daughter was a fraud, he would disown them. He could not borrow from anyone else. So he dressed in black, grabbed a crowbar, and went to smash up his father-in-law's office, not to destroy accounting records, but to find something valuable to steal and sell for quick cash to save his own skin. I slowly hung up the phone. The plastic receiver hit the wooden desk with a loud, hollow crack. The burning anger inside me was no longer a wildfire. It had turned into a massive glacier, cold, silent, and razor-sharp. The son I loved, the son I sacrificed my entire life to raise, was not just a coward. He was an absolute monster. He was ready to throw his own father out onto the street just to protect his perfect illusion of a wealthy lifestyle. He had conspired with his wife to strip away the only legacy Ruby had left behind. And Richard Sterling, that arrogant billionaire, had laughed in my face at the police station. He told me to sell my house. He knew. Maybe he did not know the exact details of the identity theft, but he definitely knew my property was vulnerable. They were all just a pack of starving wolves circling a tired old man. But they made a massive mistake. They thought I was just a retired mail carrier. They thought I was completely ignorant about technology and the law. They thought my love for my son would make me submit to their abuse. I stood up from the chair. My heart was completely turned to stone. There were no more tears left for Andre. He chose to stand with my enemies. He had cut the final string of blood that connected us. I walked into my bedroom and opened the bottom drawer of my dresser. Underneath a pile of old sweaters, I pulled out a small black notebook. It held all my important contacts. I flipped to the letter E. Evelyn Vance, a brilliant and ruthless black attorney. Over 20 years ago, when Evelyn was just a starving orphan wandering the streets of Boston, my wife Ruby brought her into this house, fed her, and helped pay for her schooling. Evelyn was now a senior partner at one of the biggest law firms in the city. She always considered Ruby her second mother. I pulled my cell phone out of my coat pocket and dialed Evelyn's number. Alonzo, a warm but powerful female voice, answered. "I am so glad you called. Are you doing well?" "Evelyn." I replied, my voice completely steady without a single trace of fear. "I need your help. Someone stole my identity and mortgaged this house for $250,000, and I know exactly who did it. They want to throw me on the street and steal Ruby's legacy. I want to take everything back. I want them to pay the absolute maximum price under the law, every single one of them." The line went completely silent for a second. When Evelyn spoke again, the warmth was entirely gone. It was replaced by the cold, sharp sound of a sword being pulled from its sheath. "Uncle Alonzo, pack up every single document you have," she said. "I will be at your house in 20 minutes. Nobody touches Aunt Ruby's house. We are going to destroy them." I hung up the phone. The real war had officially begun. Evelyn arrived exactly 18 minutes after I hung up the phone. She did not knock. She used the spare key hidden under the loose brick on the porch, the exact same key Ruby had shown her 20 years ago. When the front door opened, she stepped inside, bringing a rush of cold winter air with her. She was wearing a sharp, tailored gray suit and carrying a thick leather briefcase. She looked every inch the ruthless senior partner of a downtown corporate law firm. But when she looked at me, her eyes softened just for a fraction of a second. 22 years ago, Evelyn was just a skinny, terrified teenager sleeping on the wooden benches down at the city bus terminal. My late wife Ruby found her there shivering in the freezing rain. Ruby brought her to this house, fed her hot soup at this very kitchen table, and absolutely refused to let her go back to the streets. We paid for her textbooks. We gave her a safe, warm place to sleep. Ruby told her she was meant for greatness, and Evelyn proved her right. She fought her way through law school with teeth and claws. Now she was one of the most feared corporate litigators in Boston, and she owed her entire life to the woman whose legacy was currently under attack. Evelyn walked straight into the kitchen and dropped her heavy briefcase on the table. She did not offer any empty apologies. She did not ask me how I was feeling. She knew me far better than that. She knew that right now I did not need a shoulder to cry on. I needed a weapon. "Sit down, Uncle Alonzo," she said, opening her silver laptop. "Tell me every single detail from the moment the phone rang at 1 a.m. Leave absolutely nothing out." I sat across from her and told her everything. I told her about Andre's frantic call begging for $20,000. I told her about the fake brain aneurysm. I told her about the police officers showing up at my door. I described the holding cell, the bruising on my son's face, and the disgusting display of arrogance from Richard Sterling. I told her how Andre begged me to sell the house to save him from federal prison. And finally, I told her about the red foreclosure notice and the sickening phone call with the bank representative. Evelyn listened in complete silence. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up public property records and restricted financial databases that only high-level lawyers had access to. Her face remained perfectly blank, but I could see the muscle in her jaw twitching violently. That was the only sign of the absolute fury burning inside her. "They took out a $250,000 mortgage against this property 6 months ago," I finished, my voice steady and cold. "And they let it default. The bank wants $20,000 by noon today or they seize the house." Evelyn stopped typing. She turned her laptop screen toward me. It was a digital copy of the loan application. It had my name printed clearly at the top. It had my home address. It had my social security number. But the digital signature at the bottom was completely wrong. It was a perfect computerized replica of how I sign my checks. "This is not a simple case of a kid stealing a credit card from his father's wallet," Evelyn said, her voice low and incredibly dangerous. "This is sophisticated wire fraud. This is felony identity theft. The bank processed this loan as a remote online notarization. That means someone sat in front of a webcam, presented fake digital documents, and convinced a state-certified notary that they were Alonzo Wright." "But how could they possibly do that?" I asked, leaning forward, resting my hands on the table. "I am a 75-year-old black man. Chloe is a 30-year-old blonde white woman. How could she possibly pass a live video verification test?" "Because they did not use her face," Evelyn explained, her eyes quickly scanning the digital document. "They used deepfake technology. They took a high-resolution photograph of your face, probably one from Andre's social media accounts, and they mapped it onto a digital avatar. They used artificial intelligence voice cloning software to match your specific vocal patterns. It is becoming a massive problem in the financial sector. The bank teller on the other side of the screen thought they were looking at you, talking to you, and watching you sign the papers. But it was just a digital mask controlled by someone else." I felt a freezing, cold shiver run down my spine. The level of premeditation was staggering. They had to plan this exact crime for weeks. They had to gather my physical documents, record my voice, and set up the fake digital persona. My own son had handed them the keys to my life. "We need to call the police," I said. "We need to tell the financial fraud detectives right now." Evelyn shook her head immediately. "No, not yet. If we call the police right now, Richard Sterling will find out within 5 minutes. He has half the police captains in this city on his payroll. If he knows we discovered the fraud, he will use his massive wealth to bury the evidence. He will hire a team of cybersecurity experts to wipe the servers clean. He will make sure Chloe gets a slap on the wrist, and he will still find a way to let the bank take your house. We cannot strike until we have the kill shot ready." "What do you suggest?" I asked, looking at the brilliant woman sitting across from me. "We do what you do best, Uncle Alonzo," Evelyn said, leaning back in her chair and folding her arms. "We stay completely silent. We let them think they are winning. They think you are just a broken old man who is currently crying over his arrested son. They think you are too overwhelmed and confused by the foreclosure notice to fight back. We are going to use their supreme arrogance against them." I nodded slowly. The urge to drive to Richard's mansion and scream at him was entirely gone. Yelling is for people who have lost control. Screaming is what you do when you have no power left. I did not want to throw a tantrum. I wanted to systematically dismantle their entire lives. I wanted a silent adjustment. "First, we need to stop the bank from taking the house at noon," Evelyn said, pulling a leather checkbook out of her briefcase. "I am going to wire the $20,000 to the bank right now to cover the penalty fees and stop the foreclosure dead in its tracks. I cannot let you do that." "Evelyn," I protested, shaking my head, "that is your hard-earned money. I will not let you pay for my son's disgusting crimes." "You are not paying for his crimes," she replied fiercely, looking me straight in the eyes. "And neither am I. This is a tactical investment. We have to keep the property out of the court's hands while we build our case. If the bank seizes the house, the legal jurisdiction changes and it becomes a massive bureaucratic nightmare to get it back. I am buying us time. Aunt Ruby gave me my life back when I had absolutely nothing. $20,000 is nothing compared to what this house means to me. I will get every single penny back when we sue the Sterling family into absolute bankruptcy. I looked at her and saw the fierce, unwavering determination in her eyes. I did not argue anymore. I simply nodded. Thank you, Evelyn. She typed rapidly into the banking portal, transferring the funds and securing the house. The immediate threat of the noon deadline was gone. Now we had room to breathe. Now we had room to hunt. All right, the house is safe for now, Evelyn said, closing the banking tab. Now we need to prove exactly who orchestrated this fraud. The bank might be stupid enough to accept a deepfake video, but digital footprints are impossible to erase completely. Every time a computer connects to the internet, it leaves an internet protocol address, an IP address. It is like a digital fingerprint. Can you get the IP address from the loan application, I asked. I do not have to. Evelyn smiled a cold, predatory smile. I already hacked into the state notary public database while you were talking. I pulled the digital log from the exact moment the loan was approved 6 months ago. The bank system logged the IP address of the computer that initiated the deepfake video call. She turned the screen toward me again. There was a long string of numbers highlighted in bright yellow. I am running those numbers through a geolocation tracker right now, she explained, tapping a final key. It will tell us the exact physical location of the wireless router that was used to steal your identity. If it traces back to Chloe's house or her office, we have our smoking gun. We can prove she committed federal wire fraud and send her to prison. We sat in silence, watching the progress bar load on her screen. The small circle spun around and around, searching through thousands of digital nodes across the city. I felt my heart beating steadily in my chest. I was no longer a victim. I was a predator, waiting patiently in the tall grass. Andre thought his father was weak. Richard thought his wealth made him untouchable. Chloe thought her technology made her invisible. They were all about to learn a very painful lesson about underestimating the quiet man in the room. Suddenly, the computer let out a sharp metallic chime. The progress bar vanished, and a highly detailed satellite map of the city appeared on the screen. A bright red pin dropped down onto a specific physical address. Evelyn stared at the screen, her eyes narrowing. The triumphant smile slowly faded from her face, replaced by a look of absolute confusion and shock. What is it? I asked, leaning closer to the screen. Is it Chloe's house? Is it Richard's corporate office building? Evelyn shook her head slowly. No, Uncle Alonzo. It is not Chloe's house, and it is not the Sterling corporate building. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger at the red pin on the map. The IP address, the computer that was used to fake your signature and steal $250,000, is registered to a private network located at a very specific address, where I demanded, feeling the tension rising in the room again. Evelyn looked up at me, her eyes wide with disbelief. It traces back to a private luxury yacht currently docked at the downtown marina. A yacht registered to a massive offshore holding company. Richard just whispered, the realization hitting me like a speeding freight train. Last night on the phone, Andre told me Richard was on a yacht in the Mediterranean to explain why he could not ask him for money. But he was lying. Richard is right here in Boston. The theft of my house was not just Chloe making a desperate mistake to cover her crypto losses. It was a highly calculated attack directed from the very top. Richard Sterling was not just protecting his daughter at the police station. He was the one pulling the strings the entire time. The silent adjustment was about to turn into an all-out war. I stared at the bright red pin glowing on Evelyn's laptop screen, the private luxury yacht docked at the downtown marina. The silence in my kitchen was so heavy it felt like it was crushing the air right out of my lungs. Richard Sterling was not just a wealthy father trying to sweep his daughter's mistakes under the rug. He was the architect of my destruction. He did not just hate me because I was poor or because I was black. He hated me enough to orchestrate a massive financial crime just to wipe my family off the map. Evelyn did not say a word. Her fingers were flying across the keyboard, typing faster than my eyes could follow. She was completely in her element. She bypassed another security firewall, pushing deeper into the state and federal databases. She was going after the holy grail of digital fraud. State law required all online loan closures and remote notary sessions to be video recorded and stored securely for 10 years. If we could get that video, we would have the absolute proof of exactly who was wearing my digital face. I am breaking into the encrypted archive of the notary company. Evelyn said, her eyes locked on the screen. The bank accepted the remote signature, but the third-party notary holds the actual video file of the session. Richard probably paid someone off to make sure the file was buried deep, but they did not account for me. A progress bar flashed across the screen, and then a black video player popped up. Evelyn hit the play button. I held my breath and leaned over the table. The video buffered for a second, and then the image cleared. I felt a cold, sickening wave crash into my stomach. I was looking at myself. It was a video of a 75-year-old black man sitting in a dimly lit room. He was wearing a blue-collared shirt. The exact same blue-collared shirt I wore to my wife Ruby's funeral. The man on the screen looked exactly like me. He had my graying hair, my wrinkles, even the small scar above my left eyebrow. "Hello, Mr. Wright," the voice of the female notary played through the laptop speakers. "Are you ready to proceed with the final authorization for the $250,000 property loan?" "Yes, I am ready," the man on the screen replied. I physically recoiled from the table. It was my voice. It sounded exactly like me. The deep, gravelly tone, the slow Boston accent, every single inflection was perfectly mine. Hearing my own voice coming out of those speakers, calmly agreeing to mortgage my home away, was the most terrifying thing I had ever experienced in my entire life. "How did they get my voice to sound so perfect?" I whispered, feeling completely violated. Evelyn paused the video. "Voice cloning software," she explained. "They only need a clean audio sample of you speaking for about 3 minutes. The artificial intelligence program learns your cadence and pitch. Then the person operating the software just speaks into a microphone, and the computer translates their words into your exact voice in real time. Have you ever been recorded by them, Uncle Alonzo? Have they ever filmed you talking?" I closed my eyes and searched through my memory. Then it hit me like a physical blow. Christmas 2 years ago. Andre had begged me to come to their new house for dinner. Chloe had sat in the corner of the living room holding her expensive smartphone up. She kept pointing it at me, asking me to tell stories about my 35 years working at the post office. She smiled and said she was making a family documentary for future generations. I thought she was finally warming up to me. I thought she was finally accepting me into her life. She was not making a family video. She was harvesting my vocal data. She was building a digital mask to steal my home. "Play the rest of the video," I said, my voice turning into a hard, flat growl. "I want to see her make a mistake. Nobody is perfect." Evelyn hit play again. We watched the fake version of me nod along as the notary read through the legal terms. The deepfake technology was incredibly sophisticated, but as I stared closer, I noticed something was wrong. The eyes on the screen were completely dead. The blinking was too perfectly timed. And when the fake Alonzo spoke, his lips moved just a fraction of a second too late. Now the notary said over the audio, "Please hold your government-issued identification card up to the camera so I can verify the physical copy." This was the moment of truth. The person hiding behind the digital mask had to physically lift a stolen copy of my driver's license to the webcam. "Watch the bottom of the frame," Evelyn whispered, leaning closer to the screen. The digital tracking software was designed to map a face and a neck. It was not designed to cover a human hand. The person in the video reached up, holding my stolen driver's license toward the lens. For 2 brief seconds, the digital illusion slipped. The tracking software could not process the sudden movement. A hand appeared on the screen. It was not the large, weathered brown hand of a retired mail carrier. It was a slender, pale white hand. The fingernails were perfectly filed and painted with an expensive French manicure. And gleaming right on the ring finger was a massive 3-carat diamond engagement ring catching the light from the computer screen. "Pause it," I commanded. Evelyn slammed the spacebar, freezing the frame. She used her software to zoom in on the hand and enhance the image of the ring. It was a custom platinum band with a square-cut diamond surrounded by smaller emeralds. There was not another ring like it in the entire city. It was the exact ring my son Andre had gone into massive debt to buy for his wife. It was Chloe. She was the one sitting on her father's luxury yacht using my stolen identity and a digital mask to sign my life away to the bank. "She did not just steal from her own company," I said, piecing the disgusting puzzle together. "She stole from me. And Andre has absolutely no idea." Evelyn looked at me, her eyebrows raised. "You think Andre is innocent in this?" "Andre is a coward and a liar," I said, staring at the white hand on the screen. "But he is also incredibly stupid. He actually thought Chloe lost $200,000 trading fake internet money. That is what she told him last night to make him panic. She needed a scapegoat. She needed someone to break into that accounting office and destroy the servers so she could claim all the financial data was lost in a robbery. She manipulated my son into committing a felony just to cover her own tracks. It all made perfect, sickening sense. Richard and Chloe had orchestrated the identity theft 6 months ago. They took out the $250,000 loan against my house. They let the debt default on purpose. They wanted the bank to foreclose on me and throw me out on the street so Richard could swoop in and buy the valuable land for pennies at the bank auction. And when the bank demanded the $20,000 penalty fee to stop the foreclosure last night, Chloe used Andre. She spun a fake story about an auditor and convinced him to beg me for the cash. If I had paid the $20,000, I would have unknowingly kept the massive loan active and they would have kept draining me. When I refused to pay, she sent her husband to break into a building, knowing he would get caught. They played my son like a cheap instrument. They turned him into a desperate criminal, and they turned me into a victim. Evelyn closed the video file and leaned back in her chair. We have the smoking gun, Uncle Alonzo. We have video proof of Chloe committing federal wire fraud, bank fraud, and identity theft. I can send this to the Federal Bureau of Investigation right now. They will pull her out of her mansion in handcuffs before dinner. I looked at the silver laptop. The urge to see Chloe locked in a prison cell was incredibly strong, but I remembered the smirk on Richard Sterling's face. I remembered him dropping the bail receipt on the floor and telling me I bred a criminal. No, I said, shaking my head slowly. If we just arrest Chloe right now, Richard will hire a team of lawyers to claim she was acting entirely alone. He will say he knew nothing about the deepfake or the yacht. He will distance himself and he will survive. I do not want just the daughter. I want the man pulling the strings. Evelyn smiled a very dark, very satisfied smile. I was hoping you would say that. To destroy Richard, we need to prove he touched the stolen money, I said. We need to find out exactly where that $250,000 went after the bank approved the loan. Evelyn cracked her knuckles and pulled her keyboard closer. The bank deposited the funds into a dummy account under your name, but money does not just sit still. It moves, and every time it moves, it leaves a paper trail. I am going to track every single penny of that loan. I am going to rip open every offshore account, every shell company, and every fake trust fund Richard Sterling owns. We sat in my kitchen while the winter wind howled outside the windows. The house was cold, but the fire burning inside me was hot enough to melt steel. They thought they were dealing with a helpless old man. They thought they could execute a silent robbery and walk away richer. But they forgot one very important thing. You should never back a man into a corner when he has absolutely nothing left to lose. I was going to find out where my money went. And then I was going to walk straight into the lion's den and burn their entire empire to the ground. The glow of the silver laptop screen was the only light left in my kitchen. The winter sun was already starting to set, casting long, dark shadows across the wooden floor. We had the video. We had the absolute proof that Chloe had worn a digital mask of my face to steal $250,000. But catching a thief is only half the battle. If we wanted to destroy Richard Sterling, we had to follow the money. We had to prove the billionaire was holding the leash. Evelyn did not take a break. She did not ask for a glass of water. She just kept her eyes locked on the screen and her fingers flying across the keys. She pulled up the wire transfer logs from the fake bank account that had received the loan money. I watched the screen over her shoulder. I expected to see the money sent to some shady cryptocurrency exchange website. That was the story Chloe had fed to my son. She told Andre she lost the money in the digital markets and panicked. But as Evelyn decoded the banking ledger, the truth started to look very different. The $250,000 did not go to a cryptocurrency broker, Evelyn said, her voice tight with concentration. The money sat in the dummy account for exactly 3 hours. Then it was wired in one massive lump sum to a corporate holding account in Delaware. From there, it was split into 3 smaller wires and sent to an offshore trust in the Cayman Islands. I crossed my arms, feeling the cold draft from the window. Chloe did not lose a single penny, I said. She hid it. Exactly, Evelyn replied. But here is the part that does not make sense. If Chloe just wanted to steal $250,000, why go through the massive risk of faking your identity to get a mortgage? She is a financial director. She could have embezzled money from a dozen different corporate accounts without anyone noticing for years. Why target your specific house? Why set up a loan that was designed to default in exactly 6 months? Evelyn reached across the table and picked up the crumpled red foreclosure notice I had torn off my front door. She smoothed out the wrinkles and read the fine print at the very bottom of the page. The loan was not issued by a standard national bank, Evelyn pointed out. Look at the name of the lender. Apex Capital Lending. It is a private equity firm. They specialize in high-risk title loans. They give out cash fast, but if you miss a payment, they seize the physical property immediately. They do not want your money, Uncle Alonzo. They want your land. She dropped the red paper and went back to her keyboard. I am going to find out who really owns Apex Capital Lending, she said. I watched as she navigated through the state corporate registry. Apex Capital was listed as a limited liability company. It had no physical office. The registered address was just a post office box in a strip mall. The listed owner was not a person, but another company called Holding Group Delta. They are using nested shell companies, Evelyn explained, her eyes narrowing at the screen. It is a classic corporate maze. You hide a company inside a trust. It is designed to be a brick wall for regular investigators. But I am not a regular investigator. She pulled out a secure encrypted flash drive from her briefcase and plugged it into the laptop. I watched her access a private legal database that only federal judges and senior partners could enter. She traced the tax identification numbers, skipping past the fake addresses and the dummy corporate officers. She ripped right through the corporate veil. 10 minutes later, the computer chimed. The maze was broken. The final document appeared on the screen. It was the master registration file for the offshore trust that funded Apex Capital lending. Evelyn stopped typing. She took a deep, trembling breath and slowly turned the laptop toward me. Her eyes were wide with a mixture of absolute disgust and terrifying realization. "Look at the name of the primary beneficiary, Uncle Alonzo," she whispered. I leaned forward and read the bold black letters printed on the digital tax document. The sole owner and primary beneficiary of the offshore trust that controlled the lending company was Richard Sterling. The silence in the kitchen was absolute. The puzzle was completely finished, and the picture it formed was pure evil. Richard Sterling was the bank. He was the one who loaned the $250,000 to the fake version of me. The money Chloe stole never actually left the family. Richard took his own money, ran it through a fake loan document signed by his own daughter, and then wired the money right back into his own offshore accounts. The entire loan was a complete phantom, a ghost transaction designed for one single purpose. He wants the house. I said, the realization hitting me so hard I had to grip the edge of the kitchen table to stay standing. He orchestrated the entire identity theft just so his fake lending company could legally foreclose on my property and take the physical deed. But why, Evelyn asked, looking around my modest kitchen. Richard Sterling builds glass skyscrapers downtown. He owns luxury shopping malls. Why would a billionaire go to such insane criminal lengths to steal a small brick house in a working-class neighborhood? He could have just offered to buy it from you. He did. I answered, the memory suddenly flashing perfectly clear in my mind. A year ago, right after my wife Ruby passed away, I received a letter in the mail from a corporate real estate agent. They offered me a very large sum of money for this house. They said my street was being rezoned by the City Planning Committee for high-density commercial development. My property sits exactly on the corner lot. It is the cornerstone of the entire block. If a developer wants to bulldoze this street and build a massive luxury complex, they absolutely have to own my lot to get the proper zoning permits. I told Evelyn how I had thrown the letter in the trash. I told the agent I would never sell. This was the house I built with Ruby. This was where my memories lived. No amount of money was going to make me pack up my life and leave. Richard must be the developer behind the new project, Evelyn said, her voice dropping to a low, fierce whisper. When you refused to sell to his agents, he realized his multi-million-dollar commercial project was blocked by one stubborn old man. So he decided to simply steal it. He had his daughter fake your identity, create a phantom loan, and purposely let it default. And he used Andre, I added, feeling a wave of absolute revulsion for my own son. When the foreclosure notice was automatically generated last night, Richard needed to make sure I did not pay the penalty fee to stop it. So Chloe told Andre a fake story about needing $20,000 for an auditor. They manipulated my idiot son into coming to me. If I gave Andre the money, Richard would have kept draining me. When I said no, he knew the foreclosure would go through perfectly today. They played us all like puppets, Evelyn said, shaking her head in disgust. Richard weaponized his own daughter. He turned your son into a desperate criminal. And he used the legal banking system as a crowbar to pry you out of your own home. It is brilliant, and it is completely demonic. Evelyn reached for her phone. That is it. We have the motive. We have the money trail linking Richard directly to the fake lending company. We have the deepfake video of Chloe. I am calling the district attorney right now. We are going to bury them under so many federal charges they will never see the sun again. Wait, I said, placing my hand over hers. Do not call anyone yet. Evelyn looked at me confused. Uncle Alonzo, we have them. The evidence is bulletproof. No, it is not, I said, staring at the document on the screen. Richard Sterling is a billionaire. He has entire floors of lawyers who specialize in plausible deniability. If we hand this to the police right now, Richard will just claim he is an innocent investor. He will say his offshore trust is managed by third-party brokers. and he had no idea they were issuing predatory loans. He will throw Chloe under the bus and say she acted entirely on her own. She goes to prison, but he walks away completely clean. And he probably still finds a way to tie this house up in civil court for a decade. "So what do we do?" Evelyn asked, putting her phone down. "How do we nail the man at the top? We need a confession," I said, feeling the cold, hard stone of resolve settle into my chest. "We need Richard Sterling to admit out loud that he orchestrated the identity theft. We need him to say he wants this land, and he will never say that to a detective or a lawyer." "Who will he say it to?" she asked. "He will say it to a broken, defeated old man," I replied. I walked over to the window and looked out at the freezing street. Richard was sitting in his mansion right now, probably drinking expensive scotch, celebrating his victory. He thought I was terrified. He thought I was crushed by the weight of my son's arrest and the foreclosure notice. He believed that with his money and his power, he had successfully ground me into the dirt. I was going to give him exactly what he wanted to see. "I am going to his house," I said, turning back to Evelyn. "I am going to walk into the lion's den and play the part of the desperate beggar. I will tell him I surrender. I will offer to sign the house over to him directly if he just leaves Andre alone. His ego is massive. He will not be able to resist gloating over my dead body." Evelyn smiled, that dangerous, predatory smile again. "And while he is busy gloating, he will not realize you are holding the microphone." "Exactly," I said, taking my winter coat off the hook. "You prepare the trap, Evelyn. Draft a property transfer contract, make it look completely legitimate. Make it look like I am handing the keys to my kingdom directly to Richard Sterling. Let him think he has won the war." "Where are you going right now?" she asked, opening a new legal document on her laptop. "I am going to pay my billionaire-in-law a visit," I said, pulling my collar up against the cold. "It is time to show him how a retired mail carrier delivers the final package." I drove my old sedan out of the city limits and into the wealthy western suburbs. The transition from my working-class neighborhood to Richard Sterling's territory was like crossing into a completely different country. The cracked sidewalks and crowded street parking slowly faded away. They were replaced by massive, sprawling estates hidden behind tall stone walls and perfectly manicured hedges. The air out here felt different. It was quiet and sterile. It was the kind of neighborhood where people paid millions of dollars just to make sure they never had to look at someone like me. I pulled up to the towering wrought iron gates of the Sterling estate. I rolled down my window and pressed the button on the intercom panel. A harsh electronic voice asked for my name. When I said Alonzo Wright, there was a long pause. I could imagine the security guard calling up to the main house, asking if the billionaire actually wanted to see the retired black mail carrier parked outside. A loud buzz echoed through the freezing air, and the massive metal gates slowly swung open. I drove up a long, winding driveway paved with expensive cobblestones. The mansion itself looked like a modern fortress. It was built with gray stone and massive panels of dark-tinted glass. There was a fountain in the front yard that was completely frozen over, catching the pale winter sunlight. I parked my rusted car right next to a row of luxury vehicles. I turned off the engine and sat in the silence for a minute. I closed my eyes and prepared myself. For 75 years, I had walked through this world with my head held high. I survived poverty. I survived the loss of my wife. I survived a society that constantly tried to push me down. I had never begged another man for anything. But today I was going to do exactly that. I was going to put on the performance of a lifetime. I was going to play the exact stereotype Richard Sterling believed me to be. I was going to be the defeated, helpless old man who had finally been broken by the world. I stepped out of the car and walked up the wide stone steps. Before I could even raise my hand to knock, the massive wooden door opened. A woman in a dark uniform stood there holding the door. She did not say a word. She just stepped aside and motioned for me to enter. I walked into the grand foyer. The floors were covered in imported white marble that echoed under my heavy winter boots. The ceiling was easily 3 stories high, with a massive crystal chandelier hanging in the center. The house smelled like expensive wood polish and fresh lilies. It did not feel like a home. It felt like a museum built to showcase one man's massive ego. The housekeeper led me down a long hallway lined with expensive abstract paintings. She stopped in front of a set of heavy mahogany doors and pushed them open. Richard Sterling was sitting behind a massive desk carved from dark walnut. His office looked like a library for a king. The walls were lined with custom bookshelves, and there was a large fireplace burning quietly in the corner. Richard was wearing a tailored silver suit, perfectly pressed. He was holding a heavy crystal glass filled with amber liquor. He did not stand up when I walked in. He did not offer me a seat. He just took a slow sip of his drink and looked at me with eyes as cold as a frozen lake. I physically altered my posture. I let my shoulders slump forward. I ducked my head down just a fraction. I allowed my hands to tremble slightly by my sides. I channeled every ounce of exhaustion I had felt over the last 24 hours and pushed it to the surface. When I spoke, I made sure my voice sounded weak and thoroughly broken. "Thank you for seeing me, Richard," I said quietly, looking down at the edge of his massive desk. Richard leaned back in his leather chair, crossing one expensive shoe over his knee. The arrogant smirk I hated so much slowly crawled across his face. He looked me up and down, taking in my worn winter coat and my scuffed boots. He was completely savoring the moment. "I have to admit, Alonzo, I am genuinely surprised to see you standing here," Richard said, his voice echoing in the large room. "I expected you to be sitting in a cheap lawyer's office right now crying about your son. Did you get lost on your way to the public defender's office, or did you actually come all the way out here to ask me for bus money?" I swallowed hard, forcing myself to look like a man who had completely surrendered. "I did not come here to argue, Richard. I came here to beg you." The smirk on Richard's face grew wider. He placed his crystal glass down on the desk and leaned forward, resting his elbows on the polished wood. "Well, this is certainly a historical moment. Alonzo Wright, the proud, stubborn old man, is finally begging. Go ahead, Alonzo. I am listening. Beg." "It is about Andre," I said, my voice cracking perfectly. "He is terrified, Richard. He called me from the holding cell after you left. He is talking about taking his own life rather than going to federal prison. I know he made a terrible mistake. I know he broke into your building. But he is my only son. He is all I have left in this world." "He is a violent criminal who tried to destroy my corporate property," Richard replied coldly. "He deserves to rot in a cage, and frankly, I am doing society a favor by putting him there." I took a step closer to the desk, letting my hands shake visibly. "I know about the missing money, Richard. Andre told me everything. He told me about the $200,000 Chloe lost. He told me he was only trying to destroy the servers to protect your daughter from the auditors. He was stupid. He was reckless, but he did it out of misguided love." Richard let out a sharp, cruel laugh. "You think I care about his misguided love, Alonzo? My daughter made a small clerical error. Your thug of a son convinced her to hide it, and then he decided to smash my doors in like a common street thug. My legal team is going to make sure the judge throws the absolute maximum sentence at him. He is going away for a very long time." I reached into the inside pocket of my winter coat. My hand trembled as I pulled out a folded legal document. Evelyn had prepared it perfectly. It was a transfer of deed contract. It was the ultimate bait. "I know I cannot fight you, Richard," I whispered, letting a single tear fall down my cheek. "I know you have the money and the power to crush my boy. And I know you demanded $200,000 to make you whole. I do not have cash. You know I live on a fixed pension. But I do have one thing of value." I slowly placed the folded document onto the center of his desk. Richard looked at the paper and then looked back up at me, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. "What is this?" he asked, his voice losing some of its mocking tone. "It is the deed to my house," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "The house on the corner lot. The land you want. I had a lawyer draft the transfer papers this afternoon. I am willing to sign the entire property over to your corporate holding company. It is worth more than the $200,000 you lost. I will give you my home, Richard. I will walk away with absolutely nothing. I will move into a shelter if I have to. Just please, I am begging you, drop the federal charges against my son. Let him go." The silence in the office was deafening. I watched Richard's eyes drop back down to the document. He slowly reached out and picked it up. He unfolded the thick legal paper and began to read. I could see the reflection of the fire dancing in his cold blue eyes. I watched the gears turning in his head. Richard was a predator. He was a man who lived to conquer and acquire. He had orchestrated a massive, complex identity theft just to force my house into foreclosure so he could buy it at auction. But here I was handing him the keys directly. No auction, no waiting for the bank to process the eviction, no messy public records. I was offering him a direct legal transfer of the exact property, blocking his multi-million-dollar commercial development. He thought he had completely broken me. He thought the pressure of the arrest and the fake foreclosure had crushed my spirit so badly that I was voluntarily offering up my own head on a silver platter. His supreme arrogance blinded him to the fact that a trap was wrapping tightly around his throat. Richard read through the document twice. A slow, victorious smile spread across his face. He looked up at me, and I could see the absolute joy of a man who believed he had just won the ultimate game. You are offering to sign over your property free and clear, Richard asked, verifying the terms. You will vacate the premises by the end of the week. Yes, I nodded, looking down at the floor like a beaten dog. I will pack my clothes and leave. Just promise me you will tell your lawyers to drop the burglary charges against Andre. Promise me he will not go to federal prison. Richard leaned back in his chair and picked up his crystal glass again. He took a long, satisfying drink. He looked at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated contempt. You know, Alonzo, I almost feel sorry for you, Richard sneered. You worked your entire life. You carried heavy bags of mail until your knees gave out. You paid off your little brick house and you thought you had achieved the American dream. And now you are standing in my office trading it all away for a worthless, cowardly son who lies to your face. You are going to die with absolutely nothing. You are a complete failure of a man. I swallowed hard, keeping my eyes glued to the floor. Yes, Richard, I whispered. I am a failure. Please just take the house. Richard pulled a solid gold pen from his shirt pocket. He clicked it open. I will have my legal team review this document immediately, he said, his voice dripping with triumph. If the terms are exactly as you say, I will sign it. I will tell the district attorney that my company is no longer interested in pursuing federal charges against Andre. He will still face local trespassing charges, but he will avoid prison time. You have a deal, Alonzo. Thank you, I whispered, my voice shaking. Thank you, Richard. Get out of my house, Richard commanded, pointing his gold pen toward the mahogany doors. And start packing your boxes, old man. I want you off my property by Friday. I turned around slowly, keeping my shoulders slumped and my head down. I walked heavily across the luxurious carpet, feeling Richard's arrogant eyes burning into my back. I reached the heavy wooden doors and pushed them open, stepping back out into the long hallway. I walked past the expensive paintings and across the cold marble foyer. The housekeeper opened the front door for me and I stepped out into the freezing winter air. I walked down the stone steps and across the cobblestone driveway toward my rusted sedan. The cold wind bit into my face, but I did not feel it. When I finally reached my car, I opened the door and sat down in the driver's seat. I closed the door, shutting out the howling wind. The performance was over. I straightened my back. I rolled my shoulders until the joints popped. I lifted my head and looked back at the massive stone fortress through my windshield. The look of a defeated, broken old man completely vanished from my face. A slow, cold smile stretched across my lips. Richard Sterling thought he was a genius. He thought he had just bullied a desperate father into giving away a gold mine. He had no idea that the contract he was holding was completely worthless. He had no idea that he had just agreed to accept stolen property. By taking that contract, Richard was officially tying himself to the very crime he had orchestrated. Evelyn had set the trap perfectly, and the billionaire had just walked right into the steel jaws. He wanted my house. He was going to get a federal indictment instead. I put the car in gear and drove slowly down the long driveway. The silent adjustment was moving into its final deadly phase. I drove back from the wealthy suburbs as the winter sun completely disappeared behind the Boston skyline. The freezing darkness settled over the city, but the fire inside my chest was burning hotter than ever. Richard Sterling had taken the bait. He had proudly accepted the fake property transfer contract, thinking he had just crushed a helpless old man. He had no idea he had just tied a legal noose around his own neck. When I unlocked my front door and stepped back into my modest house, the warm air hit my face. My kitchen was still lit by the sharp silver glow of Evelyn's laptop. She had not moved from the wooden table. Empty coffee mugs were pushed to the side, and her eyes were locked entirely on the scrolling lines of data on her screen. She looked up when she heard my heavy boots on the floor. "Did he take it?" Evelyn asked, her voice sharp and focused. "He took it," I replied, hanging my heavy winter coat on the hook by the door. He practically snatched it out of my hands. He gloated. He called me a failure. He told me to pack my boxes and be off his property by Friday. He thinks he won the lottery. Evelyn smiled a cold, ruthless smile. Perfect. By accepting that contract, he legally acknowledged his intent to acquire this specific property. It establishes his direct motive. But while you were out playing the victim, Uncle Alonzo, I was busy digging through the international banking servers. I found the final destination of the stolen money. I walked over to the kitchen table and looked down at the screen. What did you find? Evelyn pulled up a series of scanned bank statements. They were heavily redacted, but her software had bypassed the security filters. Remember how the $250,000 went from the dummy account into a Delaware holding company and then vanished offshore, she explained, pointing at the highlighted numbers. I tracked the wire transfers to the Cayman Islands. The money did not go into a general corporate fund. It went into a highly secured private wealth account. She tapped the screen, bringing up the name of the account holder. It was registered entirely to Chloe Sterling. Not a joint account with Andre. Not a corporate account shared with her father. It was a private offshore vault sitting exclusively under my daughter-in-law's name. She took the money for herself, I said, feeling a fresh wave of disgust. She did not lose it in the cryptocurrency market. She did not make a bad investment. She just hid it. Exactly, Evelyn said, leaning back in her chair. She stole $250,000 using your face, and she tucked it away for a rainy day. This completely destroys any defense she might try to use. She cannot claim she was coerced by her father or her husband. She is the sole beneficiary of the stolen cash. So we have them, I said, feeling the heavy weight of the day starting to lift. We have the deepfake video showing Chloe stealing my identity. We have the bank records showing Richard funded the fake loan, and we have the offshore accounts showing Chloe kept the cash. We can go to the federal authorities right now. Evelyn let out a long, frustrated sigh and rubbed her temples. We have a massive amount of circumstantial evidence, Uncle Alonzo. We can definitely send Chloe to prison for wire fraud. But Richard Sterling is a different animal. He has an army of defense attorneys. They will argue that Richard simply authorized a business loan through his company and had absolutely no idea his daughter used a deepfake to get it. They will say Chloe acted completely alone to steal from his company and from you. I stared at her, feeling the frustration boiling up again. But we know he orchestrated it. We know he wanted this house for his commercial development project. Knowing it and proving it to a federal jury are two completely different things, Evelyn explained. Richard never put his name on the deepfake software. He never signed the offshore wire transfers. He keeps his hands perfectly clean. To put a billionaire in federal prison, we need undeniable proof of his criminal intent. We need a recording of Richard Sterling explicitly stating that he planned to steal your house and frame your son. We need his own voice admitting to the conspiracy. The kitchen went completely silent. The hum of the refrigerator felt incredibly loud. Evelyn was right. Men like Richard Sterling did not leave paper trails of their evil intentions. They operated in the shadows. They whispered their plans behind closed doors in soundproof offices. I looked away from the laptop and stared out the small kitchen window into the dark backyard. My eyes drifted toward the detached garage sitting at the end of the driveway. The old wooden doors were shut tight against the winter wind. A sudden sharp memory cut through my mind. 6 months ago, right around the exact time the fake loan was processed, Andre had driven his old college sedan to my house. He told me Richard had just bought Chloe a brand new luxury vehicle, and they did not have enough room in their driveway for the old car. He asked if he could park it in my garage for a few weeks until he found a buyer. But there was a specific detail about that old car. A detail Andre had complained about. Before he brought it to my house, Chloe had driven it for an entire week because her own car was in the shop for repairs. She had driven her father around the city in that cheap old sedan because Richard refused to take a taxi. Evelyn, I said, my voice suddenly feeling very dry. 2 years ago, Andre was involved in a hit-and-run accident. The insurance company refused to pay out because he could not prove the other driver was at fault. After that, I bought him a high-end dashboard camera for his birthday. It was a dual-lens system. It recorded the road outside, but it also recorded the entire cabin inside. It captured high-definition audio. Evelyn stopped rubbing her temples. She sat up perfectly straight. Does he still have the camera? The car has been sitting dead in my garage for exactly 6 months, I said, turning to look at her. Chloe drove it the week before Andre parked it there. The exact same week the deepfake loan was processed. Evelyn did not say a word. She just pointed her finger toward the back door. I grabbed a heavy flashlight from the kitchen drawer and walked out into the freezing night. The wind was howling off the harbor, biting through my shirt, but I did not stop to put my coat back on. I marched across the frozen grass and pulled the heavy wooden doors of the garage open. The garage smelled like old motor oil and damp cardboard. In the center of the concrete floor sat Andre's old gray sedan, covered in a thick layer of winter dust. I walked up to the driver's side and pulled the handle. The door creaked open loudly. The interior was freezing cold. I leaned across the driver's seat and shined my flashlight up at the rearview mirror. There it was. A small black plastic camera mounted securely to the glass. A thick wire ran down the side of the windshield, connecting it directly to the car's battery. It was designed to run continuously on a loop and save the files to a secure digital memory card. I reached up with trembling fingers and pressed the release latch on the side of the camera. A tiny black square popped out. It was smaller than a postage stamp, but it felt heavier than a block of solid gold in my hand. I slammed the car door shut and practically ran back across the yard. When I burst through the kitchen door, Evelyn already had a memory card adapter plugged into the side of her silver laptop. I handed her the tiny black square. She pushed it into the slot. We stood shoulder to shoulder staring at the screen. A folder popped up displaying hundreds of small video files. They were organized by date and time. The camera overwrites old footage when the card gets full, Evelyn said, her fingers moving rapidly over the trackpad. But because Andre parked the car and killed the battery 6 months ago, the last week of driving should be perfectly preserved. She scrolled down to the very bottom of the folder. The dates on the files matched perfectly. It was the 2nd week of October, the exact week my identity was stolen online. There are over 40 hours of footage here, Evelyn said. I am running an audio filter to scan for vocal matches. I am isolating Chloe's voice and Richard's voice. We waited. The progress bar on the screen moved painfully slow. The artificial intelligence software scanned through hours of mindless traffic noise, radio music, and silence. 10 minutes passed, then 20. I could hear my own heart beating in my ears. If they had not discussed the plan in the car, we were back to square one. Suddenly, the software chimed loudly. 3 files were highlighted in bright red. The system had found a 99% vocal match for both Richard and Chloe sitting inside the cabin of the car. Evelyn clicked on the first file. The video player opened. The cabin of the car was dark, illuminated only by the passing streetlights. Chloe was sitting in the driver's seat, her hands gripping the steering wheel. Richard Sterling was sitting in the passenger seat wearing a dark overcoat. Evelyn's finger hovered over the play button. She looked up at me. Ready. I nodded. Play it. The audio filled the quiet kitchen. It was crystal clear. Did you secure the offshore account? Richard asked, his voice sounding bored and completely relaxed. Yes, Daddy, Chloe answered, keeping her eyes on the road. The Cayman account is fully active. The software generated the deepfake video this morning. The stupid bank notary bought it completely. It was almost too easy. Alonzo is officially on the hook for $250,000 and the money is sitting safely under my name. I felt my stomach turn over. Hearing her casually discuss stealing my identity while driving my son's car was sickening. But what came next was the final nail in the coffin. Good, Richard said, shifting in his seat. We let the loan default for 6 months. When the bank initiates the foreclosure, you tell Andre some garbage story about losing money in the market. You make him panic. You tell him he has to get the penalty money from his father. What if the old man actually pays it? Chloe asked, sounding slightly worried. What if Alonzo empties his pension to save the house? He will not. Richard laughed, a cold, cruel sound that echoed through the small kitchen. Alonzo is too proud and too stubborn. He will refuse, and when he refuses, the bank seizes the corner lot. I step in and buy it at the commercial auction for pennies on the dollar. The zoning permits go through and my development project is secured. Chloe laughed along with him. It was a high-pitched, evil sound. I cannot wait to see that old black guy sitting on the curb with his garbage bags, she sneered. He is so pathetic. He actually thinks we respect him. But what about Andre? Chloe continued, her tone turning completely indifferent. When the foreclosure happens, he might start asking questions. He might try to look at the loan documents. Richard turned his head to look at his daughter in the dark cabin. If your idiot husband starts asking questions, we burn him. We tell the authorities he stole my corporate funds to feed a gambling addiction. We let him take the fall for everything. He is so desperate for our approval, he will probably confess just to protect you. We throw the old man on the street and we send the stupid husband to federal prison. It is a perfect sweep. The video file ended. The screen went black. The silence in my kitchen was absolute. Evelyn slowly closed the laptop screen and looked up at me. Her eyes were completely wide. She had just witnessed pure, unadulterated evil recorded in high definition. They planned the entire thing, I whispered, feeling a terrifying sense of calm wash over my entire body. They planned to steal my home. They planned to frame my son. They planned to destroy our entire family just for a piece of commercial real estate. We have the kill shot. Uncle Alonzo, Evelyn said, her voice shaking with adrenaline. This audio is the holy grail. It proves the conspiracy. It proves the intent. It proves Richard Sterling is the mastermind. I looked at the silver laptop sitting on my kitchen table. It was no longer just a computer. It was a loaded weapon. Richard Sterling thought he had won. He thought he was sitting safely in his mansion holding a signed contract for my house. Chloe thought she was safe with her offshore millions. Andre thought his father had abandoned him. They were all completely wrong. Print every single document, I said, looking at Evelyn with eyes as cold as the winter night outside. Put the video files, the bank statements, and the deepfake logs onto a secure drive. Put everything into a single briefcase. Evelyn stood up immediately. Are we calling the Federal Bureau of Investigation right now? No, I said, walking over to the coat rack and pulling my heavy winter coat back on. We are not calling them. We are going to hand-deliver this entire package to the federal prosecutor ourselves. But first, I have one more stop to make. Where are you going? Evelyn asked, looking confused. I am going to pay my son a visit, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous low rumble. He is sitting at home right now thinking he has lost everything. It is time he hears exactly what his beloved wife and his wealthy father-in-law really think of him. It is time to burn the Sterling family empire straight to the ground. Evelyn packed the silver laptop and the secure hard drive into her leather briefcase. We had the dash cam audio, we had the offshore bank statements, we had the deepfake video, the weapon was fully loaded. She told me she was going straight to her office to prepare the federal indictment package. She hugged me tightly and walked out the back door into the freezing night. I was left completely alone in the house I built with my wife. But I was not going to sleep. I knew my part in this play was not over yet. Richard Sterling was a greedy man. He was a billionaire who had just been handed the keys to the exact piece of commercial real estate he needed. A man like that does not wait until morning to finalize a victory. I knew he would send someone to collect the signed paperwork tonight, and I knew exactly who he would send. He would send his new favorite errand boy. I turned off the main lights in the living room, leaving only a small reading lamp burning in the corner. I sat down in my old armchair and waited. The old grandfather clock in the hallway ticked loudly. Every second that passed was another second the trap tightened. Almost an hour later, heavy headlights swept across my living room window. I heard the crunch of tires on the frozen gravel outside. A car door slammed shut. Then came the rapid, heavy footsteps walking up my wooden porch. The doorbell rang twice in quick succession. I stood up slowly, making sure to let my shoulders slump. I walked to the door and unlocked the deadbolt. When I pulled the heavy door open, my son Andre was standing on the porch. He looked terrible. The bruising around his eye from his arrest had turned a dark, ugly shade of purple. He was shivering in the cold air, but his eyes were wide and completely frantic. He was clutching a thick black leather folder to his chest like it was a life preserver. "Dad," he breathed heavily, stepping into the hallway without waiting for an invitation. "Richard called me. He told me you went to see him at his office. He told me what you offered to do." I closed the front door, shutting out the winter wind. I did not say a word. I just walked slowly back into the living room and sat down heavily in my armchair, acting exactly like a man who had completely given up on life. Andre followed me into the room. He stood in the center of the worn rug, looking around the house he grew up in. This was the house where his mother had baked him birthday cakes. This was the house where I had stayed up late helping him with his math homework. But he was not looking at it with any nostalgia. He was looking at it like a giant pile of cash that was about to save his skin. Andre dropped to his knees right in front of my chair. He placed the black leather folder on the coffee table and reached out to grab my hands. His hands were completely freezing. "I cannot believe you did this for me, Dad," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. He squeezed his eyes shut, forcing a few tears to leak out and run down his bruised cheeks. "Richard said you agreed to sign the house over to his holding company to cover the money I ruined. He said he will drop the federal burglary charges. I am not going to prison, Dad. You saved my life." I looked down at the top of his head. My stomach physically turned over in disgust. It was a spectacular performance. If I had not sat in my kitchen an hour ago and listened to him and his wife laughing about throwing me on the street, I might have actually believed him. I might have actually thought my son loved me. "I will make this right, I swear to God." Andre continued looking up at me with those fake, tear-filled eyes. "You are not going to be homeless, Dad. Chloe and I were already talking about it on the phone. Once this is all settled and Richard backs off, we are going to find you a really nice place to live. There is a great assisted living facility just outside the city limits. It has doctors on staff and you will make so many new friends your age. We will pay the first month's rent for you." The first month's rent. He was offering to pay 1 month of rent at a nursing home in exchange for a house worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. A house his father-in-law was stealing through a massive deep-fake identity fraud. The sheer audacity of his lies was absolutely breathtaking. "You do not have to worry about a single thing anymore, Dad," Andre said, his voice turning incredibly soft and reassuring. "You worked hard your whole life. You deserve to rest now. Letting this big old house go is the best thing for everyone. It is too much space for one person anyway. You are making the right choice. We love you so much. I slowly pulled my hands out of his grip. I looked at the black leather folder sitting on the coffee table. Do you have the papers? I asked, my voice a dry, hollow whisper. Andre nodded eagerly. His fake tears vanished instantly, replaced by a sharp, hungry energy. He flipped the leather folder open. Inside was a thick stack of legal documents. It was the official deed transfer contract prepared by Richard Sterling's massive legal team. It was full of complicated legal jargon designed to completely strip me of my rights to the property and hand it directly over to the Sterling Commercial Development Project. Richard said, "You just need to sign the last page," Andre explained, pulling a silver pen from his pocket and pushing the papers toward me. His lawyers already signed their portions. Once your signature is on the line, the house officially belongs to the holding company. The debt is cleared. I am a free man, Dad. Just sign right here on the dotted line. I took the silver pen from his hand. I felt the cold metal against my fingers. I looked down at the white paper. The line for the signature had my name printed underneath it in bold black letters, Alonzo Wright. I did not argue. I did not scream at him. I did not tell him that I knew about the deepfake video or the $250,000 sitting in his wife's offshore bank account. I did not mention the dashcam audio where he agreed to let me rot. I simply leaned forward over the coffee table and pressed the tip of the pen to the paper. I signed my name. But I did not sign it the way Richard Sterling and his army of expensive lawyers expected me to. I did not sign it as Alonzo Wright, the individual property owner. 2 years ago, when Ruby knew she was getting sick, we had gone to see Evelyn at her law firm. Ruby wanted to make sure that whatever happened, our assets would be protected from the massive taxes and predatory developers circling our neighborhood. We had legally transferred the absolute ownership of this house and the land it sat on into a private, federally protected entity. It was called the Ruby Hope Charitable Trust. The trust was designed to fund educational scholarships for underprivileged black children in Boston. I was the manager of the trust, but I did not personally own the house anymore. The house belonged to the charity. So when I dragged the silver pen across the dotted line, I wrote very clearly and very deliberately, Alonzo Wright, acting solely as authorized trustee for the Ruby Hope Charitable Trust. I finished the signature and placed the pen down on the glass table. Andre let out a massive breath of relief. He did not bother to read the words I had just written. He did not inspect the signature block. He just saw the blue ink on the white paper and his eyes lit up with absolute triumph. He thought he had just secured his freedom. He thought he had just delivered a multi-million-dollar piece of real estate to his father-in-law. He snatched the papers off the table so fast he almost knocked over a glass of water. He shoved them back into the black leather folder and zipped it shut. "Thank you, Dad," he said, jumping to his feet. "I have to get this to Richard's lawyers right now. They are waiting at his office to process the paperwork and cancel the police report. I will call you tomorrow, okay? Start packing a few bags. I will send a moving truck on Friday, just like Richard asked." He did not wait for my answer. He turned around and practically sprinted down the hallway. He opened the front door and ran out into the freezing night. I heard his car engine roar to life and the tires screech as he backed out of my driveway as fast as he could. I sat alone in my quiet living room listening to the sound of his engine fade away into the distance. Andre was driving back to his billionaire father-in-law, believing he had just won the ultimate victory. Richard Sterling was probably pouring another glass of expensive scotch, waiting to hold the deed to my land. They both thought they had completely outsmarted a tired old retired mailman. But they were about to discover a very painful legal reality. You cannot personally sign away property you do not personally own. By accepting that contract, Richard Sterling was not acquiring a piece of commercial real estate. He was legally attempting to extort and steal assets from a federally protected charitable organization. He had just escalated a local property dispute into a massive federal crime. I leaned back in my old armchair and let out a long, slow breath. The silence in the house felt completely different now. It did not feel lonely. It felt victorious. The trap was completely shut. The bait was taken. The silent adjustment was done, and the explosion was coming first thing in the morning. I stood perfectly still in the center of the living room, listening to the sound of my son's car speeding away into the freezing winter night. The heavy wooden front door was completely shut, but the cold air still lingered in the hallway. I looked down at the empty glass coffee table where the black leather folder had been resting just a few minutes ago. Andre was gone. He was racing back to the wealthy suburbs with a piece of paper he thought was going to save his life. He was delivering a signed contract to his billionaire father-in-law, believing he had just handed over the deed to my entire property. They were all celebrating right now. I could perfectly imagine the scene in Richard Sterling's massive mahogany office. Richard was probably pouring a glass of incredibly expensive champagne. Chloe was probably smiling that cold, venomous smile of hers, knowing her offshore bank account was safe. And Andre, my completely foolish and cowardly son, was probably sighing with massive relief, thinking he had avoided a federal prison sentence. They thought they had broken me. They thought a 75-year-old retired mail carrier was no match for their money and their ruthless corporate power, but they had absolutely no idea what they were actually holding in their hands. I did not sit back down in my armchair. I did not need to rest. The exhaustion that had been weighing my bones down for the last 24 hours was completely gone. It was replaced by a sharp, burning energy. A deep, powerful adrenaline pumped through my veins. I walked into the kitchen and picked up my cell phone from the counter. I dialed Evelyn's private number. She answered on the very first ring. "Is it done?" she asked, her voice tight with anticipation. "It is done." "Evelyn," I said, my voice low and incredibly steady. Andre came to the house. He brought the transfer contract Richard had his legal team draft. He put on a disgusting performance, begging and crying and promising to put me in a cheap nursing home if I just signed the house away to cover their stolen money. "And you signed it?" she asked. "I signed it exactly the way we planned," I replied. "I did not sign it as Alonzo Wright, the individual. I signed it as the authorized trustee for the Ruby Hope Charitable Trust." Andre was in such a massive panic he did not even bother to read the signature block. He just saw the blue ink, snatched the folder, and ran out the door. "He is delivering it to Richard right now." I heard Evelyn let out a sharp, victorious laugh over the phone. It was a beautiful sound. "Uncle Alonzo, that is the final nail in the coffin," she said, her voice filled with absolute triumph. "If Richard had just tried to steal your personal house, it would have been a standard case of real estate fraud. But by accepting a coerced contract to seize assets belonging to a federally registered charitable trust, he just crossed a massive red line. He is now officially attempting to defraud a charity. The federal government does not take that lightly. The Internal Revenue Service and the Federal Bureau of Investigation are going to tear his entire corporate empire apart, brick by brick." "We have everything we need," I said, staring out the kitchen window into the dark night. "We have the dashcam audio proving they conspired to steal the house and frame Andre. We have the deepfake video proving Chloe committed wire fraud and identity theft. We have the bank statements proving the money is sitting in her private offshore account. And now we have a physical contract signed under extreme duress proving Richard intended to profit from the entire criminal enterprise." "Send it, Evelyn," I commanded. "Send the entire package to the federal authorities right now. Do not hold anything back." "I am hitting send as we speak," Evelyn replied, the sound of her fingers clicking rapidly against her keyboard echoing through the phone. "I am sending the secure digital files directly to the head of the Financial Crimes Division at the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I am also copying the federal prosecutor for the district. They are going to see the deepfake video, the offshore accounts, and the dashcam audio all at once. The trap is completely set." "How long do we have?" I asked. "Federal warrants for billionaires do not get signed in the middle of the night," Evelyn explained. "The prosecutors will review the evidence first thing in the morning. They will see the undeniable proof of massive wire fraud and conspiracy. They will assemble a strike team by mid-morning. But Uncle Alonzo, they are going to want to arrest them quietly at their homes to avoid a media circus." "No," I said, my voice turning incredibly hard. "I do not want them arrested quietly in their pajamas. I want Richard Sterling to fall from the very top of his mountain. I want him to lose everything while he is standing in his glass tower looking down at the city." "What are you going to do?" Evelyn asked, a hint of concern in her voice. "Richard told me to pack my boxes," I said, a cold smile creeping across my face. "He thinks he is the absolute winner. Tomorrow morning he is going to his corporate headquarters in the financial district to celebrate closing the deal on the commercial development project. Chloe and Andre will be there to celebrate with him. I'm going to walk right into his victory party. I am going to look him in the eye and tell him exactly what he just bought." "Uncle Alonzo, that is incredibly dangerous," Evelyn warned. "Richard is a cornered animal. When he realizes what you have done, he might do something violent." "Let him try," I replied. "He took my son from me. He tried to take my home. He insulted the memory of my wife. I am not afraid of Richard Sterling. Just make sure the federal agents know exactly where the victory party is happening tomorrow morning. Make sure they arrive right on time." "I will make the calls," Evelyn promised. "I will be there with you, Uncle Alonzo. I am not letting you face those monsters alone." "Thank you, Evelyn," I said. "I will see you in the morning." I hung up the phone and placed it gently on the kitchen counter. The house was completely silent again, but it was a good silence. The storm was no longer hovering over my roof. I had successfully redirected the hurricane straight toward Richard Sterling's front door. I walked through my house, turning off the lights one by one. I walked into the bedroom and opened my closet. I reached all the way to the back and pulled out a heavy plastic garment bag. I unzipped it carefully. Inside was a dark charcoal suit. It was the absolute best piece of clothing I owned. It was the suit I had worn to Ruby's funeral 5 years ago. I had not touched it since that terrible day. I laid the suit out on the bed. I polished my black leather dress shoes until they shined. I picked out a crisp white shirt and a dark blue tie. Tomorrow I was not going to dress like a tired, retired mail carrier. I was not going to look like a victim. I was going to dress like a man who demanded absolute respect. I was going to dress for a funeral. But this time, it was not my family being buried. I lay down in bed, but I did not sleep. My mind was completely awake, running through every single detail of the plan. I thought about the look on Richard's face when he finally realized the truth. I thought about Chloe and her fake tears. I thought about Andre and the terrible choices he had made. The pain of losing my son was still there, buried deep in my chest, but it was completely numb now. He had made his bed with the enemy, and tomorrow he was going to have to sleep in it. The hours slowly ticked by. The freezing winter night eventually gave way to a pale gray morning. The sun slowly rose over the city, casting long, cold shadows across my bedroom walls. I got out of bed and took a hot shower, letting the steam clear my mind. I shaved carefully, making sure there was not a single gray hair out of place. I dressed in the charcoal suit, buttoning the white shirt and tying the blue tie perfectly straight. I slipped my feet into the polished black shoes. I looked at myself in the mirror. I looked older, yes. The wrinkles on my face told the story of a long, hard life, but my eyes were sharp and completely alive. I walked into the kitchen and made a single cup of black coffee. I drank it slowly, looking out at the frozen grass in the backyard. The house was safe. The legacy Ruby and I had built was protected by the charitable trust. The thieves had tried to break in through the front door using lies and digital masks, but they had failed completely. I rinsed my coffee mug and placed it in the sink. I put on my heavy winter coat and grabbed my car keys. It was exactly 8:30 in the morning. Richard Sterling's corporate office opened at 9. The victory party was about to begin. I walked out the front door and locked it securely behind me. The winter air was biting cold, but I felt completely warm inside. I got into my rusted sedan and started the engine. I backed out of the driveway and turned the steering wheel, pointing the car toward the massive glass skyscrapers of the downtown financial district. I drove onto the highway, merging into the heavy morning traffic. Thousands of people were commuting to their jobs, completely unaware of the massive explosion that was about to happen in the financial district. I gripped the steering wheel, feeling the vibration of the engine. I thought about Richard sitting in his penthouse office. I thought about how he looked at me in the police station, dropping that bail receipt on the floor like I was garbage. He told me I was a failure. He told me my kind always looked for a handout. Today I was going to give him a handout. I was going to hand him the consequences of his own supreme arrogance. The massive glass and steel buildings of the city skyline slowly grew larger through my windshield. The Sterling corporate tower was one of the tallest, standing right in the center of the financial hub. It was a monument to greed and ruthless power. But glass is fragile. If you hit it in the exact right spot, the entire structure shatters into a million pieces. I pulled my car off the highway exit and navigated through the busy downtown streets. I was not nervous. I was not afraid. For the first time in my entire life, I felt a sense of absolute clarity. The silent adjustment was over. The loud reckoning was about to begin. I parked my car in a public garage just 1 block away from the Sterling building. I turned off the engine and stepped out into the shadows. It was time. I left my rusted sedan in the concrete parking garage and walked out into the freezing morning air of the financial district. The city was completely alive with the chaotic rush of the morning commute. Thousands of people in gray and black suits were hurrying past me, holding hot coffee and looking down at their phones. They were all completely unaware of the massive storm that was about to hit the tallest building on the block. I pulled my heavy winter coat tighter around my charcoal suit. I did not rush. I walked with the slow, steady pace of a man who knew exactly where he was going and exactly what he was about to do. The Sterling corporate tower was a massive monument to Richard Sterling's ego. It was built entirely of dark-tinted glass and polished steel, stretching so high into the winter sky that the top floors disappeared into the low morning clouds. It looked like a giant sword stabbed directly into the center of the city. I walked through the revolving glass doors and stepped into the grand lobby. The lobby was incredibly intimidating. The floors were covered in spotless black marble and the walls were lined with massive abstract paintings. A row of security guards in sharp black uniforms stood near the elevator banks checking identification badges. I did not stop at the front desk. I did not ask for permission. I walked straight past the security guards with my head held high. When you walk with absolute purpose and you wear a funeral suit, people naturally step out of your way. They assume you belong there. They assume you have the power. I stepped into an empty glass elevator and pressed the button for the penthouse floor. The doors slid shut and the elevator shot upward with a quiet hum. I watched the city shrink away through the glass wall as I rose higher and higher above the streets. The higher I went, the quieter the world became. I thought about my son Andre. I thought about how desperate he was to climb up into this world. He wanted this glass tower so badly he was willing to throw his own father onto the street to get it. He wanted to belong to the Sterling family, even if it meant becoming a criminal. The elevator chimed softly and the doors opened onto the top floor. The penthouse suite was not just an office, it was an entire kingdom. The floors were covered in thick white carpet, and the walls were made entirely of glass, offering a completely unobstructed view of the entire Boston skyline. A young woman sitting behind a sleek white reception desk looked up at me. Her eyes widened in surprise when she saw a 75-year-old black man step off the private elevator. "Excuse me, sir," she said, standing up quickly. "You cannot be up here. This floor is restricted to executive staff only. Do you have an appointment?" I did not even look at her. I kept my eyes locked on the massive double doors made of frosted glass at the very end of the hallway. I knew Richard Sterling was behind those doors. I could already hear the faint sound of laughter echoing through the thick glass. "Sir, if you do not stop, I will call security," she warned, her voice rising in panic. I ignored her completely and kept walking. My heavy leather shoes sank into the thick white carpet. I reached the frosted glass doors and did not bother to knock. I placed both hands on the heavy metal handles and pushed them open with every ounce of strength I had left. The heavy doors swung open completely silently, but the sudden movement sucked the air out of the room. The office was massive. It was easily 3 times the size of my entire house. Richard Sterling was standing behind his custom marble desk. He was not wearing his suit jacket. His sleeves were rolled up and he was holding a crystal champagne flute. Chloe was sitting on the edge of the marble desk wearing a designer white dress and holding her own glass of champagne. And standing near the floor-to-ceiling window looking out at the city was Andre. They were celebrating. A massive green bottle of imported champagne was sitting in a silver ice bucket on the desk. They had probably been drinking since 8 in the morning. They were toasting to their incredible victory. They were toasting to the brilliant manipulation of a retired mail carrier. They thought the corner lot was officially theirs. They thought the commercial development project was completely secured. They thought they had gotten away with the perfect crime. When the heavy doors swung open, the laughter completely died in Chloe's throat. Richard lowered his champagne flute, his eyes narrowing in sudden anger. Andre turned away from the window and the color completely drained from his bruised face when he saw me standing in the doorway. "What the hell are you doing here?" Richard demanded, his voice echoing off the glass walls. "How did you get past security?" I stepped into the office and let the heavy doors swing shut behind me. I did not say a word. I just stood there looking at the 3 of them. I looked at the expensive champagne. I looked at the arrogance dripping from Richard's face. I looked at the absolute terror in Andre's eyes. "Dad," Andre whispered, taking a small step backward until his back hit the glass window. "Why are you here? I told you I would call you later. I told you I would send the moving truck on Friday." I kept my eyes locked on Richard. I slowly unbuttoned my heavy winter coat and slipped it off my shoulders, letting it fall to the white carpet. I stood tall in my dark charcoal suit. I did not look like a broken old man begging for mercy anymore. I looked exactly like what I was. A man who had come to collect a massive debt. Richard let out a harsh, mocking laugh and set his champagne flute down on the marble desk. He leaned forward, resting his hands on the polished stone. "I get it now," Richard sneered, a cruel smile twisting his face. "You woke up this morning and realized you just signed away your only asset. The reality finally hit you did it, not Alonzo. You gave me your house and now you have absolutely nothing. Did you come all the way up to my office to beg for a cash handout? Do you need me to give you some bus money so you can ride down to the homeless shelter?" Chloe let out a high-pitched laugh. She took a sip of her champagne and looked at me with pure disgust. "You really should leave Alonzo," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "This is a private corporate celebration. We are celebrating the acquisition of our new commercial property. Your old house is going to look fantastic when my father sends the bulldozers to crush it into dust next week." Andre looked down at the floor, completely unable to meet my eyes. He was standing in the corner sipping champagne while his wife and his father-in-law openly mocked the destruction of his childhood home. He was a complete coward. I did not yell, I did not raise my voice. The rage inside me was completely cold and perfectly controlled. "I did not come here for bus money, Richard," I said, my voice low and steady, carrying across the large room. "And I did not come here to beg for my house back. I came here to see the look on your face when you finally realize exactly what you bought last night." Richard frowned slightly, the mocking smile slipping just a fraction of an inch. "What are you talking about, old man? You signed the deed transfer. The contract is completely legally binding. My lawyers filed it with the city records office at 8 o'clock this morning. The property belongs to my holding company now. The deal is completely done." "Yes, it is," I agreed, taking a slow step toward the marble desk. "The deal is done. You accepted the contract. You took legal ownership of the property, but there is one tiny detail you and your brilliant lawyers completely missed in your rush to steal my land." Chloe rolled her eyes and set her glass down next to the ice bucket. "Oh, please, Daddy," she groaned. "He is just trying to bluff. He thinks he can scare us with some imaginary legal loophole. Have security throw him out before he ruins our morning." "Shut up, Chloe," Richard snapped, never taking his cold blue eyes off me. "What detail, Alonzo? What do you think you accomplished?" I stopped right in front of the marble desk. I looked directly into the eyes of the billionaire who had tried to ruin my family. "I do not personally own that house, Richard," I said, speaking very slowly and clearly, so every single word landed like a physical blow. 2 years ago, I transferred the absolute ownership of the property and the land into a federally protected charitable trust. I only manage the trust. I do not own the assets. Richard's face went completely blank. The absolute silence in the office was deafening. "So when you forced me to sign that contract last night," I continued, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "I did not sign it as an individual. I signed it as the authorized trustee of a charity. You did not just extort a retired mailman, Richard. You successfully executed a hostile takeover of a federally registered charitable organization. You officially committed massive federal fraud." "That is a lie," Richard roared, his face suddenly turning bright red. He slammed his fist down on the marble desk, making the champagne glasses jump. "You are lying. My lawyers checked the public records. The house was in your name. It was in my name before the trust was sealed," I replied calmly. "And your lawyers did not check the signature block on the contract I signed last night. They were too excited to hand you the victory." Chloe looked at her father, her eyes wide with sudden panic. "Daddy, what is he talking about? What does that mean?" "It means your father just handed the federal government written proof of his intent to commit corporate extortion," I said, turning my cold gaze toward my daughter-in-law. "But do not worry, Chloe. I did not forget about you. I know you did not lose that $250,000 in the cryptocurrency market. I know it is sitting safely in your private offshore account in the Cayman Islands." Chloe's mouth dropped open. The color drained from her face so fast she looked like a ghost. She stumbled backward away from the desk. "How do you know about that?" she whispered, her voice completely terrified. Andre finally looked up from the floor. He stared at his wife, his eyes wide with confusion. "Chloe, what is he talking about?" he asked, his voice trembling. "You told me you lost the money. You told me we were completely broke." "She lied to you, Andre," I said, not even looking at him. "She lied to you to make you panic. She wanted you to break into the accounting office so she could blame the missing money on you if the auditors found out. She set you up to take the fall for her federal wire fraud." "That is insane," Richard yelled, taking a step around the desk toward me. "You have absolutely no proof of any offshore accounts. You have no proof of anything. You are just a crazy old man making wild accusations because you lost your house. I am calling security right now and having you thrown out on the street." Richard reached for the sleek black telephone on his desk. He picked up the receiver and started to dial. He was still arrogant. He still thought he could control the situation. He thought his money and his power could build a wall between him and the consequences of his actions. He did not realize that the wall had already been completely demolished. I did not try to stop him from making the call. I simply reached into the inside pocket of my charcoal suit. I pulled out my cell phone. I unlocked the screen and opened the audio file Evelyn had sent to me. I turned the volume on the phone all the way up to the maximum level. "Richard," I said, my voice cutting through the quiet hum of the office. "Before you call your security guards, I think you should listen to a very interesting conversation I found on my son's dashboard camera." Richard froze, holding the telephone receiver halfway to his ear. I pressed the play button. The crystal-clear audio of Richard's own voice filled the massive glass office. The recording of him and Chloe sitting in the car planning to steal my house and frame Andre echoed off the walls. I watched their faces as the reality of their complete destruction finally hit them. The silent adjustment was over. The explosion had officially begun. The audio from the dashboard camera filled the massive penthouse office. The sound was incredibly clear. Everyone in the room could hear the low hum of the car engine on the recording. And then Chloe's voice echoed off the glass walls. I watched my daughter-in-law's face as she heard her own recorded voice bragging about setting up the offshore bank account in the Cayman Islands. I watched her perfectly manicured hands start to shake as the audio played her exact words detailing how she used deepfake software to fool the bank notary and steal my identity. The color completely drained from Chloe's face. She looked like all the blood in her body had suddenly turned to ice. The champagne glass she was holding slipped right out of her fingers. It hit the thick white carpet with a dull thud, spilling expensive alcohol everywhere. But nobody looked down at the mess. All eyes were locked on the small black cell phone in my hand. Then Richard's voice came through the speaker. The billionaire heard his own recorded laughter filling his own corporate sanctuary. The audio played the exact moment he called me a pathetic old black guy. It played his cruel prediction that I would be sitting on the curb with garbage bags while he sent bulldozers to crush my home. Richard did not move. He stood completely frozen behind his marble desk. The arrogant smirk that had been plastered on his face for the last 24 hours was entirely gone. His jaw was clenched so tight I thought his teeth might shatter. But the worst reaction did not come from Richard or Chloe. The worst reaction came from the corner of the room. Andre was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window. He heard his wife and his father-in-law talking about him on the recording. He heard Chloe's voice turning completely cold and indifferent as she asked what they should do with him. And then he heard Richard lay out the final phase of their master plan. "If your idiot husband starts asking questions, we burn him. We let him take the fall for everything. He is so desperate for our approval he will probably confess just to protect you. We throw the old man on the street and we send the stupid husband to federal prison. It is a perfect sweep." I pressed the button on my phone and the audio stopped. The silence that followed was heavier than a concrete vault. It pressed down on the room, suffocating everyone inside. Andre slowly lowered his champagne glass. His hand was trembling so violently the liquid splashed over the edges. He took a staggering step forward, moving away from the glass window. He looked at his wife, the woman he loved, the woman he had lied for, the woman he had broken the law for. "Chloe," he whispered, his voice breaking into a pathetic whimper. "You said you lost the money. You told me you needed my help. You were going to let me go to federal prison for 20 years. Chloe could not even look at him. She stared at the floor, her chest heaving as she struggled to breathe. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. There were no more lies left to tell. The digital mask was completely ripped off. Andre turned his head and looked at Richard. "You set me up," Andre said, his voice growing louder, his fists clenching at his sides. "You sent me to your own building with a crowbar. You knew I would get caught. You wanted me to get arrested so you could use my freedom to blackmail my father." "Shut up!" Andre Richards suddenly barked, his voice cracking like a whip. He slammed his hand down on the marble desk, trying to regain control of the room. He was a predator who had just realized he was standing in a trap, but his instinct was still to attack. Richard glared at me, his blue eyes burning with absolute hatred. "You think you are incredibly smart, Alonzo," he sneered, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You think bringing a stolen audio recording into my office changes anything? That recording is completely inadmissible in a court of law. It was taken without our consent. My legal team will have it thrown out by a judge before you can even file the paperwork. You cannot prove a single thing." I put my phone back into the inside pocket of my charcoal suit. I did not flinch at his yelling. I stood my ground, feeling the deep, calm power of a man who held all the cards. "You can argue with the judge about the audio recording all you want, Richard," I said calmly. "But you cannot argue with the digital footprints. Evelyn already hacked the state notary database. We have the video of your daughter holding up my stolen driver's license wearing a digital mask of my face. We can see her custom engagement ring right on the screen. And we have the wire transfer logs proving the money went straight from your dummy lending company into Chloe's private offshore account. The money never left your family. The Federal Bureau of Investigation has all of it. Chloe's knees buckled. She reached out and grabbed the edge of the marble desk to keep herself from collapsing onto the floor. "Daddy," she cried out, her voice shrill and completely terrified. "They are going to arrest me. You have to fix this. You promised me this would work." Richard ignored his daughter. He took a step out from behind the desk, walking toward me. His face was twisted into a mask of pure desperation and rage. "It does not matter what you sent to the authorities," Richard growled, stopping just a few feet away from me. "I still win, Alonzo. Do you understand me? I still win. You might send my daughter to prison, but you cannot touch me. My name is nowhere on those wire transfers, and more importantly, I still have your house." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He shook it right in my face. "I have the deed transfer contract right here," Richard yelled, his voice echoing off the glass walls. "You signed it last night. My lawyers filed it this morning. You voluntarily surrendered the property to my holding company to cover a debt. The land is mine. The commercial project is moving forward. You are still going to die homeless and broke. You gave me exactly what I wanted." I looked at the piece of paper in his trembling hand. I looked at the billionaire who was clinging to a worthless document like it was a life raft in the middle of a hurricane. I actually felt a brief moment of pity for him. He was so blinded by his own greed and arrogance that he had not even bothered to read the fine print. "I did give you exactly what you wanted, Richard," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous rumble. "I gave you a contract, but I did not give you my house." Richard stopped shaking the paper. He stared at me, his brow furrowing in confusion. "What are you talking about?" he demanded. "I have your signature right here on the bottom line. Andre brought it to me last night. I saw it with my own eyes." "You saw blue ink on white paper?" I replied, taking a slow, deliberate step toward him, forcing him to step back. "But you did not read the words I wrote. You and your massive team of expensive lawyers were in such a hurry to steal my land, you just assumed I signed my own name as an individual property owner." Richard quickly unfolded the contract. He flipped past the first few pages of dense legal jargon and stared down at the signature block on the very last page. His eyes scanned the ink. I watched his pupils dilate. I watched his breathing stop completely. 2 years ago, I explained, my voice steady and completely relentless. My late wife, Ruby, and I went to see Evelyn at her law firm. We wanted to protect our home from greedy developers like you. So we legally transferred the absolute ownership of the house and the land into a private entity. We created the Ruby Hope Charitable Trust. It is a federally registered philanthropic organization designed to provide educational scholarships for underprivileged children in the city. The silence in the penthouse office returned, but this time it was not just heavy. It was completely lethal. "I do not personally own that house, Richard." I continued, making sure he heard every single syllable. "The charity owns the house. I am simply the authorized trustee." So when I signed your little contract last night, I wrote very clearly that I was signing solely as the manager of the Ruby Hope Charitable Trust. The piece of paper slowly slipped out of Richard's hand and fluttered down to the white carpet. "You cannot legally sign over the assets of a federal charity to pay off a personal debt," I said, stepping right up to him. "The contract you are holding is completely worthless for transferring the property, but it is incredibly valuable for something else." Richard looked up at me. His face was pale and covered in a cold sweat. He knew exactly what was coming. He knew the legal trap had just snapped shut around his neck. By demanding that contract and accepting it, I said, my voice ringing with absolute authority, "You officially attempted to extort and steal assets from a federally protected charity. You took a local real estate scam and escalated it into a massive federal crime. And because you used the banking system to execute the fraud, you also committed federal racketeering." "No," Richard whispered, shaking his head slowly. "No, my lawyers. They would have caught this. They would have stopped me." "Your lawyers did not catch it because your idiot son-in-law rushed it to them in the middle of the night," I replied, looking over at Andre, who was standing in the corner completely paralyzed. "Andre was so desperate to save himself, he handed you a live grenade, and you were too arrogant to look at the pin." Chloe let out a loud sobbing wail and slid down the side of the marble desk, collapsing into a heap on the floor. She buried her face in her hands, crying hysterically. She finally realized her luxury life was over. There would be no more yachts, no more designer clothes, just a concrete cell and a federal jumpsuit. Andre just stood there staring at the floor. He had lost his wife, he had lost his father-in-law, he had lost his father, and he had done it all completely to himself. "You destroyed us," Richard whispered, staring blankly at the wall. "No," I corrected him, adjusting my dark blue tie. "You destroyed yourselves. I just sat quietly and let you do the heavy lifting. I told you I came here to see the look on your face when you realized what you bought. And I have to admit, Richard, it is a very satisfying look." I turned my back onto the billionaire. I did not need to say anything else. I walked across the thick white carpet toward the heavy frosted glass doors. I picked up my heavy winter coat from the floor and draped it over my arm. I pushed the doors open and stepped back out into the reception area. The young woman behind the desk was staring at me, her eyes completely wide with fear. She had undoubtedly heard the yelling through the glass. "Have a wonderful morning," I told her politely. I walked down the hallway toward the private elevator. Just as I pressed the call button, the loud chime of the main lobby elevators echoed down the corridor. I turned my head and watched as the steel doors slid open. A team of men and women wearing dark blue windbreakers stepped out onto the penthouse floor. The bright yellow letters on the back of their jackets spelled out the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Evelyn was walking right behind the lead agent carrying her silver briefcase. She saw me standing by the private elevator and gave me a small, firm nod of absolute respect. The agents bypassed the reception desk and marched straight toward the frosted glass doors of Richard Sterling's office. I stepped into my elevator and pressed the button for the ground floor. As the glass doors closed, sealing me inside, I heard the loud, commanding voice of a federal agent echoing down the hallway, telling Richard Sterling to put his hands behind his back. The silent adjustment was complete. The storm had finally broken, and the sky was completely clear. I kept my hand on the edge of the glass elevator door, stopping it from closing completely. I had waited for this day for far too long. I had endured the humiliation, the lies, and the complete destruction of my dignity for far too long to miss this final moment. I stepped out of the private elevator and stood at the end of the hallway, hidden behind a stone wall, watching everything unfold. The federal agents wearing dark blue windbreakers with the bright yellow letters printed across their backs smashed through the frosted glass doors of the office. The sound of the metal hinges slamming against the wall echoed across the entire penthouse floor. The room that used to be a symbol of Richard Sterling's absolute power, where he made ruthless decisions to destroy other people's lives, was now completely flooded with law enforcement. "Nobody move." The voice of the lead federal agent cut through the thick air, cold and completely decisive. "We have a federal arrest warrant for Richard Sterling and Chloe Sterling. Please place your hands on the desk and step back." I watched through this clear glass wall. Richard stepped back from the marble desk, his face flushing bright red with absolute fury. His supreme arrogance ran so deep in his blood, he honestly could not believe anyone would dare to storm his kingdom. He raised a hand, pointing an accusing finger at the agents, using his familiar condescending tone. "What the hell are you doing in my office? Do you have any idea who I am? I am Richard Sterling. I can call the mayor right now and have all of you fired before lunch. I am going to sue every single one of you for trespassing and corporate harassment." The lead agent did not even blink. He was not intimidated by wealth or empty threats. He stepped forward and slammed a thick stack of documents down on the marble desk, right next to the bubbling bottle of expensive champagne. "Mr. Sterling, you are under arrest for financial fraud, conspiracy to commit extortion, money laundering, and federal wire fraud. We have the complete records of your shell company and your offshore banking network. We have the audio recording of you conspiring to extort assets from a charitable trust. A federal judge froze all of your personal and corporate bank accounts exactly 10 minutes ago. You currently do not have a single penny to your name to pay for a lawyer." Richard looked down at the arrest warrant. His cold blue eyes widened in pure shock. His proud shoulders suddenly completely collapsed. The power he was always so proud of, the millions of dollars he used to crush other people, was now completely useless against a piece of paper carrying the seal of the federal government. When two agents grabbed his expensive suit jacket and twisted his arms behind his back, Richard did not even have the strength to fight. The cold click of the steel handcuffs locking around the billionaire's wrists echoed in the room. It sounded like beautiful music. Across the room, Chloe started screaming. A female agent approached her, holding a pair of handcuffs. Chloe backed away, tripping over a lounge chair and falling hard onto the pristine white carpet. The fall made her look incredibly pathetic. "No, you cannot arrest me. I did not do anything wrong. Daddy, help me. Tell them to stop. I am a high society citizen. You cannot handcuff me like some common street criminal." "Ms. Chloe Sterling," the female agent said, her voice calm but incredibly firm, completely ignoring the hysterical screaming. "You are under arrest for massive wire fraud, felony identity theft, and the embezzlement of $250,000. We have already seized the corporate servers, and we have the video evidence of you using deepfake technology to execute the fraud. Anything you say from this moment forward will be used against you in a federal court." Chloe kicked and thrashed wildly as the freezing steel locked tightly around her wrists. Her perfect makeup was completely ruined by her tears. Her designer white dress was wrinkled and torn. She turned her head and looked at Andre, who was standing completely paralyzed in the corner of the office. "Andre, help me. Do something. Call a lawyer. Take the fall for me like you promised. I am your wife. You cannot let them take me away." But Andre did not move a single muscle. He stood there staring blankly at the woman he had been ready to sacrifice his entire family to protect. Chloe's words just now were the final knife twisting deep into his heart. She still wanted him to take the blame. She still saw him as nothing more than a disposable pawn. He remembered the dashcam audio where she laughed about sending him to prison if they got caught. He finally saw the absolute monster hiding behind her beautiful face. Andre smiled a bitter, incredibly painful smile. "You are not my wife," he whispered, his voice breaking with massive regret. "You are just a parasite." Another FBI agent walked over to Andre. He jumped back and threw his hands up in the air, his face turning completely pale. "Please do not arrest me. I did not know anything about the identity theft. I was tricked. They lied to me." "You are Andre Wright, correct?" the agent asked, his eyes sharp and observant. "You are not currently under arrest in this operation. However, you are the primary suspect in a federal investigation regarding conspiracy, aiding a felony, and the destruction of corporate property. Your passport has been officially flagged and revoked. You are restricted from leaving your primary residence, and you are strictly forbidden from leaving the city of Boston until you are summoned by a federal court. If you attempt to flee, we will issue a nationwide manhunt." Andre nodded frantically, tears streaming down his bruised face. His entire world was completely shattered. The luxury house, the expensive cars, the glamorous life he always wanted was all just a massive illusion built entirely on lies. Now he had no wife, no wealthy father-in-law, no money, and no father left to beg for help. He was completely alone, facing a massive federal investigation and years in prison. The agents began to escort the Sterlings out of the office. Richard walked slowly, his head hung completely down in shame, dragging his feet across the carpet. When he was led out into the hallway, he lifted his head and saw me standing there with my arms crossed over my chest. Our eyes met in a long, completely silent moment. There was no more arrogance in Richard's eyes. There was no more disgust. There was only absolute emptiness and the terrifying realization of a man who had just lost his entire empire. He looked 10 years older than he did just a few minutes ago. The man who told me I was going to die, broke and homeless, was now walking straight through the doors of absolute destruction. I did not smile. I did not mock him. I just stood tall and watched him walk past me. The ultimate punishment for an arrogant man is not yelling or cursing at him. It is the absolute silence from the very person he used to look down on. Chloe was dragged out right behind him, screaming and crying hysterically, demanding a lawyer, but nobody paid any attention to her. Her high-pitched voice slowly faded away as the doors to the freight elevator closed, securing the criminals inside. Evelyn walked out of the office. She stepped right up next to me and smiled a soft, incredibly peaceful smile. "It is all over, Uncle Alonzo. Richard's entire wealth is frozen pending investigation. Aunt Ruby's house is permanently secured and the charitable trust is completely untouched. I did exactly what she taught me to do, protect the good things and never back down from the bad ones." I nodded, feeling a warm, powerful wave wash over my chest, completely melting the freezing cold of the last 2 days. "Thank you, Evelyn. I could never have done this without you. Ruby would be so incredibly proud of you." I turned around, stepped back into the private glass elevator, and pressed the button for the main lobby. As the elevator slowly descended, I looked at my reflection in the glass doors. I am Alonzo Wright, a 75-year-old black man who used to deliver the mail, a father who lost his foolish son but managed to protect the legacy of his entire family. The sky above my enemies had completely collapsed. The order of my world was finally restored. When I walked out of that skyscraper and took a deep breath of the freezing morning air, I knew I was finally going home. Not to a house waiting to be foreclosed on, but to an absolutely impenetrable fortress. The federal agents escorted Richard and Chloe out of sight, leaving a deadly silence hanging over the entire penthouse floor. The massive glass office that used to be a symbol of supreme arrogance and ruthless power now looked exactly like an empty cage. Expensive champagne glasses lay scattered across the pristine white carpet. There was no one left in the room, except me and Andre, the son I had raised with my own sweat and sacrifice. was standing completely paralyzed in the corner of the room. His entire world had just collapsed right in front of his eyes. He had no money. He had no wealthy in-laws. He had no glamorous future. And the perfect illusion of his successful life was completely shattered. Andre slowly stepped out of the corner. His legs were shaking so badly he looked like he might collapse at any second. He looked around the empty office and then he looked at me with absolute sheer panic in his eyes. All his delusions of grandeur were gone. Only the brutal reality remained. He was about to face federal prosecutors and the very real threat of a long prison sentence. He walked toward me, his eyes welling up with tears. And then, just like a lost child, he dropped to his knees right in front of me. His knees hit the white carpet with a heavy thud. "Dad," he sobbed, his voice completely broken and desperate. "Dad, I am so sorry. I am so incredibly sorry. I was so stupid. I was completely blinded by the money and the lifestyle. I did not know they were that ruthless. You have to believe me. I never wanted to hurt you. I just wanted to protect my family. I had no idea Chloe was lying to me too." I stood there looking down at him, kneeling at my feet. The distance between us right now was not just a few feet. It was an entire lifetime of betrayal that could never be repaired. I remembered that night when he called me at 1 a.m, inventing a sick story about his wife dying just to steal my money. I remembered him bringing that fake property deed to my house, crying fake tears and trying to throw me out on the street to save his own skin. "Do not call me Dad," I said, my voice completely level and as cold as ice, carrying absolutely zero emotion. "That word does not belong to you anymore, Andre. When you stood in that police station and watched your wife and her father humiliate me. When you conspired with them to steal my identity. When you tried to steal the only home your mother left behind. From that exact moment, you cut the blood tie between us with your own hands." "Dad, please do not say that," Andre cried out, reaching forward to grab my pant leg. I stepped back, completely avoiding his touch. "Please do not abandon me right now. I am under federal investigation. They took my passport. They are going to drag me into court for conspiracy and covering up a felony. I do not have a single penny to hire a lawyer. Chloe and Richard locked up all the accounts. I am going to go to federal prison. You are the only person left in the entire world who can save me. You still control the charitable trust. You can use that money to bail me out. Please have mercy on me." I looked straight into his pathetic eyes. It was absolutely disgusting that even in his darkest moment of pure desperation, he was still only thinking about draining me. He still looked at me like I was a blind rescue station expected to sacrifice everything for his mistakes. I reached into the inside pocket of my suit jacket and pulled out a small, folded bank receipt. I tossed it down onto the white carpet right in front of him. The thin piece of paper fluttered down and landed right next to his tears. Andre looked at the paper and then looked up at me completely confused. "Last night I went to my bank," I said, every word dropping like a freezing stone. "I unlocked a small portion of my personal retirement savings." "You needed $20,000, right, Andre?" "The exact amount of money you tried to extort from me by making up a story about a brain aneurysm." "Well, I transferred exactly $20,000 into your personal checking account this morning." Andre blinked his eyes wide. He could not believe what he was hearing. "Dad," he whispered, a tiny glimmer of hope lighting up his red eyes. "You gave me the money. You forgive me. You still love me, right?" "I did not give you that money to save you," I interrupted, crushing that tiny glimmer of hope instantly. "I gave you that money to settle my final debt. Use that $20,000 to hire a cheap defense lawyer. Use it to prepare for your federal hearings. Use it to buy a cheap suit to wear in front of the judge, because that is absolutely all you are ever going to get from me. That is the very last dime you will ever receive from my hands." Andre let out a loud gasp and his face went completely pale again. "No, Dad, $20,000 is not enough. Federal defense lawyers cost hundreds of thousands. I need more than that. You cannot just leave me to face them alone. They will crush me." "You are a grown man," I replied, my voice sharp as a razor. "You chose to step into the ring with ruthless predators. Now you have to face the consequences all by yourself. I protected your mother's house. I took back my dignity. And I have officially paid my final debt to you. From this moment forward, do not ever call my phone. Do not ever come to my house. I do not have a son." I did not wait for him to say another word. I turned my back and started walking away. The agonizing sound of Andre screaming and crying for his father echoed behind me, bouncing off the glass walls. But my feet did not stop, and I did not hesitate for a single second. I walked out of the penthouse office, letting the heavy frosted glass doors swing shut, leaving a lifetime of lies and betrayal completely behind me. I stepped into the private elevator and pressed the button for the lobby. A massive wave of relief washed over my entire body. The incredibly heavy stone that had been sitting on my chest for years was finally lifted. When the elevator reached the ground floor, I walked across the grand lobby. I walked past the security guards who were still whispering about the historic arrests. Nobody dared to step in my way. I pushed through the revolving glass doors and stepped outside. The freezing winter morning air hit my face, but it felt incredibly refreshing and warm. The city sky was bright blue and massive. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with absolute freedom. It was finally over. The arrogant billionaires were going to pay a terrible price for their endless greed. The most brutal sentence had been executed not with violence, but with extreme patience and intelligence. The silent adjustment had successfully completed its mission. I walked down the sidewalk, blending in with the busy crowd of morning commuters. I was no longer a defeated old man waiting to be discarded by his ungrateful family. I was Alonzo Wright. I was going back to my home. A home filled with the priceless memories of my beloved wife, Ruby. A home that was now a permanent, impenetrable fortress that no greedy developer or lying relative could ever touch. I smiled a soft, incredibly satisfied smile. Sometimes the most painful endings are actually the most brilliant new beginnings if you just have the courage to pick up the pen and write your own story. Today, my truly free life had officially begun. The greatest lesson I learned from this entire nightmare is that blood does not automatically make someone family. Real family is built on mutual respect and loyalty, not manipulation and endless greed. For years, I thought my duty as a father was to constantly sacrifice my own peace to clean up my son's messes. I thought my older age made me powerless against their wealth and their technology. But I finally realized that true strength comes from setting absolute boundaries. Sometimes the most empowering thing you can do for your own soul is to walk away from toxic people even if you share the exact same last name. You must never let anyone mistake your quiet patience for weakness. If you have ever had to cut toxic family members out of your life to protect your own dignity, let me know your story in the comments below, and do not forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more content.